Blood smeared across white tile in a hospital where nobody knew the truth. Four men with guns kicked through the emergency doors, hunting for a witness who wouldn't survive the night. And the only person standing between massacre and mercy was a 32-year-old nurse everyone assumed was too soft to matter. Dr. Marcus Webb had spent 11 months making sure Emily didn't forget her place. He'd torn apart her assessments in front of residents, questioned her judgment loud enough for patients to hear, and treated her like hired help who barely understood basic triage. The staff whispered that she couldn't handle pressure. Families requested different nurses. Even security looked past her like furniture. But when those doors exploded open and the screaming started, the woman they'd dismissed was the only one who understood exactly what kind of war had just walked into Riverside General. If you want to see how a story this explosive ends, stay with me until the final word. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to know how far this story travels. The fluorescent lights above Riverside General Hospital in Marshall Point, Washington, hummed the same dead frequency they had for the past 11 months. Emily Dawson kept her head down and her hands steady as she updated the chart for Bed 7, a teenager with stomach pain who'd probably eaten something stupid at a party. The pen moved across paper with the kind of practiced efficiency that came from too many shifts where every second mattered and nobody cared. Dawson. She didn't flinch. Dr. Marcus Webb's voice carried that particular tone, the one that meant he'd found something to criticize in front of an audience. Yes, doctor? Webb stood near the nurse's station with two residents flanking him like disciples. He held up her chart from the previous shift, the one she'd completed for a 53-year-old man presenting with chest discomfort. You documented elevated troponin levels and recommended immediate cardiology consult. The patient had anxiety. Webb's smile didn't reach his eyes. Classic panic attack. You would have wasted cardiology's time and hospital resources because you can't distinguish between a heart attack and nerves. One of the residents smirked. The other looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Emily met Webb's stare for exactly 2 seconds, long enough to show she wasn't broken, short enough to avoid escalation. The EKG showed what I interpreted correctly after you'd already created unnecessary panic. Webb dropped the chart on the counter. Stick to vitals and basic care. Leave diagnosis to physicians who actually understand medicine. She nodded once. I'll make a note. Webb walked away already talking to the residents about something unrelated, the dismissal complete. Emily picked up the chart and returned it to the rack. Her hands didn't shake. They never did. That particular skill came from a different life, one where shaking hands got people killed. Don't let him get to you, Sarah Chen said quietly from the supply cart. The younger nurse had started 3 months ago and still possessed that spark of outrage at injustice. He's a complete asshole. He's the chief of emergency medicine, Emily said, and we have patients. You're too calm about this. Emily pulled fresh gloves from the box. Being upset won't change anything. What she didn't say was that Marcus Webb's cruelty ranked somewhere below moderate on the scale of things she'd endured. Compared to holding pressure on a femoral artery while mortar fire walked across a compound in Kandahar, his insults were white noise. The ER settled into its usual rhythm, the organized chaos of minor emergencies, insurance problems, and people who genuinely needed help mixed with those who just needed someone to listen. Emily moved through it like water, efficient and unremarkable. She placed IVs, updated charts, monitored vitals, and made sure nobody died on her watch. The work mattered even if the people around her didn't see past the quiet blonde woman in scrubs that had seen better days. Around 9 p.m., Jeremy Costa from security stopped by the nurse's station. He was young, maybe 25, and treated the job like babysitting with a uniform. Quiet night, he said, leaning against the counter. So far? Emily logged medication distribution on the computer without looking up. You ever get tired of it? Same thing every shift? She glanced at him. People need care every shift. Yeah, but... He trailed off, searching for words he'd never find. Seems like you could do more. You're smart. I've seen you catch things the doctors miss. Dr. Webb would disagree. Jeremy shifted his weight. Webb's a dick. Everyone knows it. Everyone also knows he runs this department. Emily closed the program and stood. I need to check on the patient in 4. She left before he could continue the conversation. Sympathy was worse than contempt because it required explanation, and Emily had spent years perfecting the art of offering none. Her past remained locked behind walls that Marcus Webb's cruelty couldn't touch, and Jeremy Costa's kindness couldn't scale. The patient in bed 4 was stable, a construction worker with a badly sprained ankle and a high tolerance for pain. Emily adjusted his ice pack and confirmed his medication schedule while he flipped through channels on the mounted television, some action movie where the hero never ran out of bullets. "You military?" he asked suddenly. Emily's hands didn't pause. "Why do you ask?" "You move different. My brother's army. You got that same—" He gestured vaguely. "I don't know. Way of standing." "Just a nurse," Emily said, finishing her notes. "Try to keep weight off that ankle for at least 48 hours. She left before he could press further. The observations bothered her less than they used to. Civilians noticed patterns without understanding them, seeing shadows of something they couldn't name. As long as nobody asked direct questions, the past stayed buried where it belonged. 10:15. Emily restocked supplies in the trauma bay, counting packages of gauze and checking intubation equipment with the muscle memory of someone who'd done this particular inventory in field hospitals, where supplies meant the difference between bleeding out and making it home. The ritual soothed something she didn't examine too closely. "Still here, Dawson?" Dr. Webb appeared in the doorway like a bad omen. He'd changed into fresh scrubs, but still carried that air of superiority like cologne. "Inventory," Emily said. "How thorough." He stepped into the bay, picking up a package of surgical supplies she'd already counted. "Tell me something. Why did you become a nurse?" The question landed wrong, weighted with mockery. Emily set down her clipboard. "To help people." "Really? Because from where I stand, you seem content doing the bare minimum while collecting a paycheck." Webb examined the package like it held secrets. No ambition, no drive, just quiet little Emily going through motions. "I do my job. You do what you're told." He dropped the package back on the pile. "There's a difference between competence and excellence, Dawson. You've mastered mediocrity." Emily met his eyes. "Is there something specific you need, doctor?" "I need nurses who enhance this department instead of dragging it down." Webb moved closer, and she caught the faint smell of coffee and ego. "I'm recommending administrative review of your performance. Too many judgment errors, too much hesitation. Maybe emergency medicine isn't your calling." The threat hung between them. Emily's pulse didn't spike. Her breathing didn't change. Those responses had been trained out of her in environments where panic killed faster than bullets. "I understand," she said. Webb looked disappointed, like he'd wanted a reaction he could weaponize. "Of course you do. Back to work, Nurse Dawson." He left. Emily returned to counting supplies with the same steady precision, but something had shifted. The administrative review meant paperwork, meetings, and eventually a push toward resignation or termination. Marcus Webb had decided she didn't belong, and in his kingdom, that decision mattered. Sarah found her 20 minutes later. "I heard. I'm sorry." "It's fine." "It's not fine. He's targeting you, and everyone knows it." Sarah's voice carried genuine anger. "You should file a complaint. Document the harassment." Emily sealed the supply cabinet. "That would make it worse." "How could it possibly be worse?" "Because men like Webb don't lose, they just get angrier." Emily picked up the clipboard. "I'll find another hospital." "That's not fair." "Fair doesn't matter." Emily walked toward the exit, then paused. "But thank you for being upset on my behalf." She meant it. Sarah's outrage was honest and clean, untainted by the calculating violence Emily had learned to recognize in people who hurt others because they could. Webb was cruel, but he wasn't dangerous, not in the ways that left bodies behind. The ER hummed around her. 11 months of this place, this routine, this careful construction of normal life. Maybe it was time to move again. She'd done it before. Packed everything that mattered into 2 duffel bags and driven until the rearview mirror showed nothing but distance. Peace was always temporary. She'd learned that lesson in places where peace was a fairy tale told to civilians. 11:43. The ambulance bay doors opened with their familiar hydraulic hiss, and two paramedics rushed a gurney through the entrance. The patient was young, maybe 19, with blood soaking through makeshift bandages on his chest and abdomen. His skin had that grayish pallor that meant shock was winning. Gunshot wounds, 2 entry points, significant blood loss, the lead paramedic rattled off. BP dropping, pulse thready, found him in an alley off Morrison Street. Webb materialized from somewhere. All business now. Trauma 1. Dawson, get him stabilized. Emily moved without thinking, hands already reaching for IV access while her brain processed vital signs and injury patterns. The muscle memory was old and deep. This exact scenario played out 100 times in different contexts where the stakes were always survival and the clock was always running. Second ambulance, 2 minutes out, someone called. The ER shifted into organized chaos. Emily worked with smooth efficiency, placing lines and monitoring the patient while Webb barked orders and residents scrambled. The young man's eyes flickered with consciousness and terror. "Stay with me," Emily said quietly. "We've got you." The second ambulance arrived 90 seconds later. Another gunshot victim, older, maybe mid-30s, with similar wounds. The paramedics looked shaken. "What the hell happened out there?" Webb demanded. "Gang shooting near Morrison and 5th, the paramedic said. "Police are still securing the scene. They said there might be—" The ambulance bay doors exploded inward. 4 men entered with the kind of purposeful violence that Emily recognized instantly. They weren't running. They weren't panicking. They moved with the controlled aggression of people who'd done this before and knew exactly what they wanted. 3 of them carried visible weapons, handguns held low but ready. The 4th, taller, with a scar cutting through his left eyebrow, held nothing but projected authority. The ER froze. Conversations died mid-sentence. A child's crying cut off into shocked silence. "Nobody move," the scarred man said. His voice carried easily, practiced at command. "Nobody makes calls, nobody plays hero." Jeremy Costa started to reach for his radio. One of the gunmen pivoted toward him with mechanical precision. "Hands where I see them. Now!" Jeremy's hands came up slowly. His face had gone pale. Emily's brain shifted into a different mode. The one she'd tried to leave behind but never fully escaped. Her eyes tracked positions, movements, threat assessment. 4 hostiles, 3 armed that she could see. The scarred leader moved like someone with training. The youngest one, maybe 22 with nervous hands, was the weak link. The other 2 were enforcers, muscle with enough experience to be dangerous, but not enough discipline to be professional. "We're looking for someone," Scarred said, scanning the room. "Young guy, gunshot wounds, came in maybe 5 minutes ago." He was looking for the first patient, the teenager Emily had just stabilized. Webb stepped forward with the kind of authority that worked in boardrooms but meant nothing here. "You need to leave. This is a hospital." Scarred looked at him like he was furniture. "Where is he?" "I don't know who you're—" The gunman to Scarred's right moved forward and struck Webb across the face with the butt of his pistol. The chief of emergency medicine dropped hard, blood streaming from a split above his eye. Someone screamed. The young resident started forward, then stopped when a gun barrel pointed at his chest. "I'll ask one more time," Scarred said. "Then people start dying." Emily's hands remained steady at her sides. Her breathing stayed controlled. Every instinct from years of combat medicine was awake now, analyzing, calculating. The teenager they wanted was Marco Vega. She'd seen the name on his admission paperwork. He'd lost consciousness since arrival, currently in trauma 1 behind her. The youngest gunman was scanning faces, his weapon hand trembling slightly. Amateur, the kind who'd panic and shoot at shadows. The other enforcer had prison ink on his neck and dead eyes that said he'd done this before. The scarred leader was the real problem. He had the patience and control that came from experience. "Check the rooms," Scarred ordered. The enforcers started moving. Emily's mind raced through scenarios. Marco was maybe 30 seconds from being found. Once they had him, they'd kill him and probably eliminate witnesses. The police were coming. Someone had definitely triggered a silent alarm, but response time was at least 4 minutes. Too long. Sarah stood frozen near the nurse's station, her earlier outrage replaced with pure terror. Jeremy had his hands up, young and overwhelmed. Webb was on the floor, dazed and bleeding. The residents looked ready to faint. A mother clutched her daughter in the waiting area, both crying quietly. Emily made a decision. She took 3 steps toward the young gunman and spoke clearly. "He's already dead." Everyone looked at her. The young gunman's weapon swung toward her center mass. "What?" Scarred's attention focused completely on Emily. "The patient you want. He coded 2 minutes ago." Emily kept her voice level, conversational. "Too much blood loss. We couldn't save him." "You're lying. Check the trauma bay. We stopped working on him when you came in." Emily gestured toward Trauma 1. "If you know medicine, you'll see he's gone." The scarred man studied her with the kind of attention that came from sniffing out deception in environments where lies cost lives. Emily held his stare, gave him nothing, and used the oldest trick she knew: tell the truth sideways. Marco had coded briefly during stabilization. They'd brought him back, but Scarred didn't know that. "Show me," he said. Emily turned and walked toward Trauma 1 with perfect calm, aware of guns at her back and death maybe 3 seconds away if this went wrong. She pushed through the door into the bay where Marco lay unconscious but alive, his monitors steady. Emily moved to the nearest crash cart and made a show of checking the defibrillator. "See for yourself," she said. Time of death was approximately 11:52. Scarred approached the bed. Marco's chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. The monitor showed a heartbeat. Emily had exactly 1 second before he realized the lie. She grabbed the crash cart and slammed it into Scarred's knees. He went down hard. In the same motion, she pivoted toward the young gunman who'd followed them in and swept his weapon hand up and away. The gun discharged into the ceiling. Emily drove her elbow into his throat and stripped the pistol from his grip as he gagged and dropped. The entire sequence took less than 3 seconds. Scarred was already recovering, reaching for his own weapon. Emily kicked it away and put the young gunman's pistol against his temple. "Tell them to stand down," she said quietly. The 2 enforcers appeared in the doorway, weapons raised. They saw their leader on his knees with a gun to his head and froze. "Tell them," Emily repeated. Her voice carried no emotion, no fear, nothing but absolute certainty. Scarred's eyes showed something new: recognition. He was looking at her differently now, seeing past the scrubs to what she actually was. "Stand down," he said. Nobody moved. The young gunman was on the floor, clutching his throat and trying to breathe. Marco's monitor beeped steadily. Somewhere in the ER, someone was crying. Emily's hands were completely steady, her finger on the trigger with the muscle memory of someone who'd done this before, in places where hesitation meant dying. "Drop the weapons," Emily said, "or I end this right now." The Prison Inc. enforcer smiled. "You're a nurse." "I used to be a lot of things." Emily's eyes didn't leave Scarred. "You've got 5 seconds to decide if you want to find out what." The tension stretched. 4 heartbeats. 5. Then the sound of sirens cut through the night, distant but approaching fast. Everything happened at once. The enforcers bolted for the exit. Scarred tried to grab Emily's weapon hand. She pivoted, used his momentum against him, and drove him face first into the floor with enough force to stun. The young gunman was still gasping on the ground, no longer a threat. Emily stood, the pistol steady in her hands, and watched Scarred struggle to focus through the pain. "Don't move," she said. Police flooded the ER 30 seconds later, tactical units with rifles and shields, moving with the kind of precision that meant they'd been preparing for the worst. They found Emily standing over 2 suspects with a gun she handled like someone who'd been trained by professionals. "Drop the weapon," an officer shouted. Emily set the pistol down slowly and raised her hands. "Nurse Emily Dawson." The other 2 suspects fled through the ambulance bay. One has prison tattoos on his neck, the other is approximately 6'2", wearing a black jacket. The officer blinked at the precise report, then gestured for her to step back. Emily moved away from Scarred and the young gunman as officers secured them both. The ER was a disaster. People crying, Webb still bleeding on the floor, equipment scattered everywhere. "Ma'am, we're going to need a statement," the officer said, "after I stabilize my patient." Emily moved back to Marco's bedside and checked his vitals. His pressure was dropping again. "I need a surgical consult immediately. He's bleeding internally." For a moment, nobody moved. Then Webb's voice cut through, weak but present. "Someone get surgery down here. Now." The ER lurched back into motion. Sarah appeared at Emily's side, her hands shaking but her voice steady. What do you need? Fresh O-neg, 2 units, and get Dr. Webb looked at. I'm fine, Webb said from the floor. He wasn't, but that was a problem for later. The next hour blurred into controlled chaos. Surgeons arrived and took Marco to the OR. The 2 captured gunmen were taken into custody. Police interviewed witnesses and secured evidence. Someone finally got Webb into a bed and stitched up his head wound while he protested the entire time. Emily gave her statement to a detective named Nathan Briggs, who looked at her with the kind of attention that meant he was actually thinking instead of just filling out paperwork. You disarmed 2 armed suspects, he said. One was inexperienced, the other was injured. Still, Briggs studied his notes. That's not standard nursing training. I took self-defense classes. Uh-huh. He didn't believe her, but he also didn't push. The leader, the one with the scar, his name is Daniel Cross. He's got a record longer than my arm. Assault, armed robbery, suspected involvement in at least 3 murders. Not the kind of guy who goes down easy. Emily said nothing. And the way you handled that weapon, Briggs tapped his pen against the notepad. That was professional. I was defending my patient. You were. Briggs closed his notepad. We'll need you to come down to the station tomorrow for a full statement, but off the record, you saved a lot of lives tonight. He left. Emily returned to the ER where normalcy was trying to reassert itself despite the evidence of violence scattered everywhere. Jeremy Costa sat in a chair looking shell-shocked. The residents whispered in corners. Sarah organized cleanup with the kind of manic energy that came from surviving something terrible. And Marcus Webb stood near the nurse's station with a bandage on his head, watching Emily with an expression she couldn't quite read. She walked past him toward the supply room, intent on restocking trauma 1 for the next emergency that would inevitably arrive. His voice stopped her. Dawson. She turned. Yes, doctor? Webb looked older suddenly, the arrogance stripped away by violence and realization. How did you know what to do? Emily met his eyes. Training. What kind of training? The kind that keeps people alive. She turned away again. I need to restock supplies. This time he didn't stop her. Emily entered the supply room and closed the door, leaning against it for exactly 10 seconds. Her hands weren't shaking, her breathing was controlled, but something had cracked, the careful wall between who she used to be and who she'd tried to become. When she opened the door, Detective Briggs stood outside with a tablet in his hands. His expression had changed. I ran your name through the system, he said quietly. Standard procedure after an incident like this. And I found something interesting. Emily's silence was answer enough. Emily Dawson, age 32, nursing degree from Seattle Community College, licensed 5 years ago. Clean record, no outstanding warrants, nothing suspicious. Briggs turned the tablet toward her. Except there's no Emily Dawson matching your description in any federal database before 7 years ago. Which means either you appeared out of nowhere or that's not your real name. Emily held Briggs' stare without flinching. The hallway around them continued its usual rhythms. Nurses moving between rooms, monitors beeping their steady warnings, someone's phone ringing unanswered at the station. Normal hospital sounds that felt suddenly fragile. I don't know what you're talking about, she said. Yes, you do. Briggs lowered the tablet. Look, I'm not here to jam you up. What you did tonight was heroic. But I've been a cop for 19 years, and I know when someone's running from something. Question is whether that something matters to my case. Your case is about 4 men who attacked a hospital. My case is about why they attacked this hospital. Briggs glanced down the hallway, then back to her. Marco Vega isn't some random gang member. He's a courier for the Cordova network, drug distribution, money laundering, the whole operation. And 3 days ago, he walked into the federal building and offered to testify against every single person above him in exchange for witness protection. Emily processed that. So tonight was a hit. Tonight was supposed to be an execution that never made it to trial. Briggs crossed his arms. But here's what bothers me. Daniel Cross and his crew are professionals. They don't make mistakes. They had intel. They knew exactly when Marco would be here, which ambulance, probably even which trauma bay. That's not luck. That's someone feeding them information. You think there's a leak? I think there's a reason they walked in here confident enough to take hostages in a building full of potential witnesses. Briggs's eyes narrowed. And I think whoever Emily Dawson used to be might have the kind of background that could help me figure out who's selling information to murderers. The weight of old decisions pressed against Emily's carefully constructed walls. She'd left that life behind for reasons that still woke her up at 3 a.m., reasons that involved blood on her hands and choices that couldn't be unmade. Coming back, even partially, meant opening doors she'd spent years sealing shut. I was a combat medic, she said finally. Army. Did 2 tours overseas before medical discharge. Changed my name afterward because I wanted distance from that life. That's all there is. It wasn't all there was, not even close. But it was enough truth to satisfy basic questions without opening the files that stayed buried under classification levels most cops never knew existed. Briggs studied her face. Medical discharge for what? PTSD. The lie came easily because it was also partly true. I did my time. I got out. I built a new life. End of story. And the combat training that let you disarm 2 armed men? Stayed with me. Emily met his eyes. Muscle memory doesn't care about discharge papers. For a long moment, Briggs said nothing. Then he nodded slowly. Okay. For now, that's enough. But if this investigation goes where I think it's going, I'm going to need more than the basics. If your investigation needs military records from a combat medic who's been out for years, you've got bigger problems than me. Emily turned toward the supply room. I have work to do. She left him standing there and focused on the immediate task, restocking supplies, checking equipment, maintaining the rhythms that kept hospitals functioning. The familiar routine helped push back the adrenaline crash that wanted to happen. Later. She'd deal with the fallout later. Except later arrived 10 minutes sooner than expected in the form of Marcus Webb appearing in the supply room doorway. The bandage on his head made him look less authoritative and more human, which somehow made the conversation she knew was coming worse. We need to talk, he said. Emily finished counting packages of 4x4s. About what? About the fact that you just took down armed assailants like some kind of action movie character. Webb stepped into the room and closed the door. Who the hell are you? The nurse you were planning to fire. I'm serious, Dawson. So am I. Emily faced him directly. You spent 11 months telling me I was incompetent, soft, mediocre. And tonight when bullets started flying, you froze. So maybe the question isn't who I am. Maybe it's whether you actually know how to judge people at all. Webb's jaw tightened. That's not fair. You're right. Fair would be me filing formal complaints about hostile work environment, targeted harassment, and abuse of authority. Fair would be documenting every time you've undermined me in front of staff and patients. Fair would be making sure the hospital board knows their chief of emergency medicine creates toxic conditions that drive away competent nurses. Emily kept her voice level. But I don't do fair. I just do the job. You could have told someone about your background. Why? So you could use it as another reason I don't belong? Emily returned to counting supplies. My past isn't anyone's business. My performance is. And you judge that performance based on your own insecurities, not reality. Webb was silent for several seconds. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its edge. You're right. I was wrong about you. Yes. That's it? Just yes? Emily set down her clipboard. What do you want, doctor? An absolution speech where I tell you it's okay and we can move forward? You made my life miserable for almost a year because it made you feel powerful. You don't get to feel better about that just because circumstances forced you to see what was always there. I'm trying to apologize. You're trying to feel less guilty. Emily picked up a box of supplies. There's a difference. She left him standing there and returned to the organized chaos of the ER, where normal crises continued despite the violence that had torn through an hour earlier. A child with a broken arm. An elderly woman with chest pain. A college student who'd gotten drunk and needed stitches. The work didn't stop because 4 men with guns had turned the night into something else. Sarah intercepted her near the nurse's station. Are you okay? I'm fine. Emily, you held a gun to someone's head. I defended a patient. Emily pulled up charts on the computer. Is the woman in bed 9 still waiting on X-ray results? Yes, but Then let's focus on that. Sarah looked like she wanted to argue, but a new ambulance call came through and the moment passed. Emily spent the next 2 hours working with the kind of focused intensity that kept thoughts away. Every IV placement, every vital sign check, every medication administration became a meditation on the present tense. The past could wait. The future didn't matter. Right now, someone needed care. At 3 a.m., Jeremy Costa found her in the break room. His eyes were red-rimmed and his hands shook slightly as he poured coffee that would taste like burnt regret. "I couldn't move," he said suddenly. "When they came in, I just froze." Emily looked up from her own coffee. "You didn't get anyone killed. That's what matters. You moved. You stopped them. I had different training." "It's more than that." Jeremy sat down heavily. "I'm supposed to be security. I'm supposed to protect people. And when it mattered, I was useless." Emily studied the young man across from her, barely out of college, working a job that usually meant checking badges and escorting out drunk patients. Nothing in his background had prepared him for armed assailants hunting witnesses. "You know what I learned overseas?" she said quietly. "The first time someone shoots at you, your body doesn't care about training or duty or any of that. It just wants to survive. You didn't run. You didn't make it worse. That's better than most people manage. But I had years of watching people die to teach me how to move when everything says freeze." Emily's coffee had gone cold. "Don't compare yourself to that. Just figure out if this is the job you want after tonight." Jeremy nodded slowly. "Were you really just a medic?" Everyone kept asking variations of the same question, poking at the edges of a story that didn't belong in this life. Emily stood and dumped her coffee in the sink. "I was really just someone trying to keep people alive, still am." She left before he could dig deeper. The ER had thinned out, the overnight lull between late-night emergencies and early morning disasters. Emily checked on her remaining patients, updated charts, and tried to ignore the way staff kept looking at her with new eyes. The quiet nurse had become something else, and people didn't know how to reconcile the change. Around 4:30, Dr. Webb appeared again. He'd changed scrubs and removed the bandage, leaving the stitches visible above his left eye like evidence. "Marco Vega's out of surgery," he said. "They got the internal bleeding stopped. He'll live." Emily nodded. "Good. The detective wants to talk to you again. He's upstairs in the surgical waiting area." "Now?" He said it's important. Webb hesitated. "Dawson, Emily, I meant what I said earlier. I was wrong. And I'm going to recommend the administrative review be dropped. Don't do me favors. It's not a favor, it's correcting a mistake." Webb met her eyes. "You're one of the best nurses I've ever worked with, and I was too arrogant to see it. That's on me." Emily studied him for a moment. The apology was real this time, stripped of ego and self-interest. It didn't erase 11 months of cruelty, but it was something. "Okay," she said. "Okay. I heard you. We move forward." Emily turned toward the stairs. "I need to see what the detective wants." She climbed to the 3rd floor where surgical waiting areas stretched empty at this hour. Detective Briggs sat alone, his jacket off and his tie loosened. He looked tired in the way cops did when cases got complicated. "Marco's talking," he said without preamble. "Not everything, but enough. The people who sent Daniel Cross aren't small time. They're connected to the Cordova organization at levels that make federal prosecutors nervous." Emily sat down across from him. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because Marco says there's a 6th person." "What?" "Cross brought 3 men we know about, but Marco insists there was a 6th person involved. Someone who stayed outside, coordinated communications, and disappeared before police arrived." Briggs pulled out his tablet and showed her security footage. This was captured from a traffic camera 2 blocks away, approximately 90 seconds after the attack started. The image showed a figure in dark clothing moving away from the hospital with purposeful strides. The angle was wrong for facial identification, but the body language was clear, someone leaving a scene, not fleeing it. "Could be anyone," Emily said. "Could be, except the timing matches perfectly with when Cross and his crew would have realized the plan was falling apart." Briggs zoomed in on the figure. "This person walked away like they knew exactly where to go and how to avoid additional cameras. That's not panic, that's training." "You think they had professional help?" I think whoever fed them intel about Marco's location and timing also provided tactical support. Briggs closed the tablet. And here's where it gets interesting. Marco says the person coordinating communications used military terminology, not gang slang, not cop talk, military radio protocol. Emily's chest tightened. That doesn't mean... It means someone with military background helped plan an execution inside a civilian hospital. Briggs leaned forward. Now, I'm not saying it's connected to your past, but I am saying that if there's anything you remember, anything you might have noticed about how Cross and his crew operated, I need to know. The pieces were shifting into patterns Emily recognized from operational briefings in places where allegiances changed faster than weather. Someone inside the system was playing both sides, and the sixth person was the key. Cross moved like he had training, she said carefully, but it was old, outdated tactics, the kind someone learns in basic combat courses and never updates. Meaning whoever ran the operation knew enough to be dangerous, but not enough to adapt when things changed. They planned for a quick in and out against minimal resistance. They didn't plan for someone who could fight back. Emily met Briggs' eyes. That's arrogance or inexperience? Maybe both. Briggs made notes. Anything else? The youngest one, the one I disarmed, he was following orders without understanding them. Cross had to direct him at every step. That's bad operational security. Professional teams don't bring liabilities. Emily paused. Someone assembled this crew fast and cheap. That suggests desperation. The Cordova network is desperate because Marco's testimony could bring down their entire infrastructure. Briggs stood. Which means they're going to try again, and next time they'll send better. The implication hung heavy. Emily had bought Marco time, but time was just another countdown to the next attempt. You need to move him, she said, already in motion. Federal marshals are taking custody in approximately 3 hours. He'll be in a secure facility before sunrise. Briggs put on his jacket. But I need you to be careful. If there is a sixth person, and if they think you can identify them, you become a problem that needs solving. Emily almost laughed. The idea that she'd become the target was grimly familiar, just another variation on patterns she'd lived through in combat zones where everyone was a potential threat, and survival meant staying 3 steps ahead of whoever wanted you dead. I'll be careful, she said. Briggs left her alone in the waiting area. Emily sat in the pre-dawn silence and let herself acknowledge what she'd been avoiding. This wasn't over. The attack on Marco was just the opening move in something larger, and she'd put herself in the middle of it the moment she'd decided to fight back instead of staying invisible. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Emily stared at it for 3 rings before answering. Yes? Silence on the other end, then a voice she didn't recognize. Emily Dawson. Formerly Sergeant Emily Garrett, 3rd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment. Medical detachment with additional classified attachments. Discharged 7 years ago under circumstances that remain sealed. Emily's blood went cold. Who is this? Someone who knows what you really are. The voice was calm, almost conversational. You made a mistake tonight. You showed people what you can do. And now decisions need to be made about whether that's a problem. If this is a threat, it's information. You stopped an operation that cost significant resources to arrange. People are unhappy. People want compensation. A pause. You have 48 hours to decide if you want to walk away from this or if you want to see how deep the consequences go. The line went dead. Emily sat motionless, her mind racing through implications. Someone knew her real identity. Someone had access to sealed military records. Someone was connected enough to both the Cordova network and her classified past to threaten her with information that shouldn't exist outside secure databases. The sixth person wasn't just a coordinator. They were embedded in systems with access to federal records. She stood and moved toward the stairs, her training already mapping out threat assessments and response options. But halfway down, she stopped. Sarah stood on the landing below, her expression strange. How long have you been there? Emily asked. Long enough to see you take a phone call that made you look scared. Sarah climbed the remaining steps. Who was that? Wrong number. Don't lie to me, not after tonight. Sarah's voice was quiet but firm. I watched you disarm armed men without hesitation. I watched you hold a gun like you'd done it 1,000 times. And now I'm watching you look genuinely afraid for the first time. So who called you? Emily considered the options. Lie and push Sarah away, tell partial truth and maintain distance, or acknowledge that the walls she'd built were crumbling and maybe, just maybe, she couldn't navigate this alone. Someone who knows things they shouldn't, Emily said finally. About your past? About who I used to be before I became a nurse. Emily leaned against the wall. I wasn't just a combat medic, Sarah. I did things that stay classified for reasons that protect people. And someone just told me they know all of it. Sarah processed that. Are you in danger? Probably. Then we need to tell the police. And say what? That someone made a vague threat based on information that's supposed to be sealed? Emily shook her head. Detective Briggs is already suspicious. Telling him more just opens doors I can't close. So what are you going to do? Emily looked at the younger nurse who'd shown her kindness in a place that offered none. Sarah didn't deserve to be pulled into whatever was coming, but the expression on her face said she'd already made the decision to be involved. I'm going to finish my shift, Emily said. Then I'm going to figure out who knows my real name and how they got access to records that are supposed to be buried. I'll help. This isn't your fight. You saved everyone in that ER tonight. That makes it my fight. Sarah's jaw set with determination. Besides, you've been alone here for 11 months. Maybe it's time you had someone watching your back. Before Emily could respond, footsteps echoed up the stairwell. Jeremy Costa appeared, breathing hard. There's a problem, he said. Federal marshals just arrived early to transfer Marco. And Doctor, Webb says there's someone here asking for you. Who? Military. Said his name is Colonel David Brennan and that you'd know what it's about. The bottom dropped out of Emily's world. David Brennan was the commanding officer from her last deployment, the one who'd signed off on her discharge and recommended the name change that let her disappear. She hadn't spoken to him in 7 years, and his presence here meant the walls between her past and present had just completely collapsed. Where is he? Emily asked. Main lobby. He's in uniform. Emily descended the stairs with Sarah and Jeremy following. The ER had started to fill with early morning patients, but a cleared space near the entrance showed where a military officer in dress uniform stood waiting. Colonel Brennan looked older, more gray in his hair, deeper lines in his face, but his posture was the same ramrod straight bearing that had commanded respect in war zones. He saw Emily and his expression shifted into something complicated. Sergeant Garrett. I'm not a sergeant anymore, Emily said quietly. No. You're a nurse who just happened to take down a tactical assault team with the kind of precision that raised flags at every intelligence agency monitoring this hospital. Brennan glanced around at the watching staff. Is there somewhere we can talk privately? Emily led him to an empty consultation room and closed the door. Brennan waited until they were alone before speaking. Your discharge was supposed to keep you invisible, he said. The name change, the sealed records, the medical classification, all of it was designed to let you build a civilian life without questions. And in one night, you've blown all of that apart. They were going to kill a patient. I understand that. I'm not questioning your actions. I'm questioning the consequences. Brennan pulled a folder from his jacket. Homeland Security flagged the hospital assault within 20 minutes. NSA ran facial recognition on everyone involved. And your new identity pinged alerts that went straight to people who remember exactly what Sergeant Emily Garrett accomplished during her service. Emily's stomach twisted. What people? People who have questions about whether your skills might be needed again. Brennan opened the folder. There's been chatter. Communications intercepts suggesting the Cordova network has connections to international trafficking operations that cross into national security territory. And someone on our side thinks you're positioned to provide intelligence. I'm a nurse. You're a decorated combat medic with training in counterintelligence and tactical operations who just demonstrated you haven't lost any of your edge. Brennan met her eyes. They want you to go active again. Embed yourself in the investigation. Help identify the leak that's feeding information to the Cordova network. No. Emily, I said no. I left that life because it was killing me, because I'd seen enough people die and made enough impossible choices. Emily's voice stayed level through pure force of will. I became a nurse to save lives, not to play spy games for agencies that will burn me the second I'm not useful. Brennan was quiet for a moment. What if I told you the leak is someone you know? Emily went still. What? The intelligence suggests someone with medical access and military connections. Someone who could provide patient information and coordinate timing. Brennan pulled out a photograph. Someone like Dr. Marcus Webb. The accusation hit like physical force. Emily stared at the photo showing Webb in what looked like surveillance footage, meeting with someone in a parking garage. That's not possible, she said. Why? Because he's a doctor? Because he runs this ER? Brennan's expression was grim. Webb has gambling debts approaching $200,000. His ex-wife is suing for unpaid alimony, and 3 weeks ago he had dinner with a man we've identified as a mid-level Cordova operative. Emily's mind raced back through 11 months of interactions. Webb's cruelty, his need to assert dominance, his presence in the ER tonight when the attack happened. She'd assumed he was just an insecure bully, but what if it was more calculated? What if pushing her toward resignation was about removing someone who might notice things? You can't prove anything from a photograph, she said. No, but you could. You're inside this hospital. You have access to systems and schedules. And after tonight, you have credibility with the detective investigating the attack. Brennan leaned forward. Help us prove Webb is the leak, and you can go back to your civilian life. Refuse, and this investigation will eventually expose you anyway. It was a trap dressed as an opportunity, and Emily recognized the manipulation tactics from her military service. They weren't asking, they were maneuvering her into position where refusal meant worse consequences. And if I say no anyway? Then your sealed records stay sealed, but you'll be under surveillance for the foreseeable future. Every patient you treat, every conversation you have, every movement you make will be monitored by people who don't trust loose ends. Brennan closed the folder. I'd rather not see that happen to you. Emily looked at the man who'd once commanded her in combat zones where every mission carried body counts and moral compromise. He wasn't lying about the surveillance. That was how these agencies operated. If they couldn't recruit you, they controlled you. How long? She asked. 72 hours. Prove Webb is the leak or prove he's clean. After that, the investigation moves forward without you. And if he's not the leak? Then we have bigger problems. Brennan stood. I need an answer, Emily. She thought about Marco Vega fighting for his life upstairs, about Sarah and Jeremy and all the patients who'd been caught in crossfire tonight, about the phone call threatening her with consequences if she didn't walk away, about the fact that walking away meant leaving questions unanswered and threats unresolved. 48 hours, Emily said. I'll give you 48 hours, but after that I'm done. No surveillance, no recruitment, no more visits from my past. Brennan extended his hand. Deal. Emily shook it, sealing herself into an agreement she'd probably regret. Brennan left through the main entrance, and Emily returned to the ER, where her shift was technically over, but leaving felt impossible. Sarah intercepted her near the supply room. What did he want? To remind me that the past never stays buried as deep as you hope. Emily pulled off her badge. I need to go home. Can you cover my patients for sign-out? Of course, but Emily... Sarah hesitated. Be careful. Whatever's happening, it's bigger than just tonight. Emily nodded and left through the staff exit into the gray pre-dawn light. Her car sat in the far corner of the parking lot, exactly where she'd left it 14 hours ago, when the night had been normal. She was halfway across the lot when she noticed the detail that didn't belong. A white envelope tucked under her windshield wiper. Emily approached slowly, scanning the parking lot for threats. Empty. She pulled the envelope free and opened it carefully. Inside was a single photograph showing her in military fatigue standing with a group of soldiers in what looked like Afghanistan. Her face was younger, harder, marked by experiences she'd spent years trying to forget. On the back, written in neat handwriting, "We remember who you really are." Emily stared at the photograph for exactly 5 seconds before her training kicked in. She scanned the parking lot again, still empty, but that meant nothing. Whoever had placed this envelope knew her schedule, her vehicle, and enough about her past to access classified military photographs. They weren't just watching, they were sending a message. She got in her car, locked the doors, and drove toward her apartment with her eyes constantly checking mirrors. No tail that she could detect, but professionals wouldn't be obvious. The photograph sat on the passenger seat like evidence of every decision that had led her here. Her apartment was a third-floor walk-up in a complex that catered to hospital staff and people who valued cheap rent over amenities. Emily cleared each room methodically before allowing herself to breathe. Nothing disturbed, no signs of entry. She secured the deadbolt and chain, then sat at her small kitchen table with the photograph face up. The image showed her at 24, standing with her unit outside a compound in Helmand Province. She remembered that day. They'd just finished a medical evacuation under fire that had saved 3 Marines and cost them one of their own. Her face in the photo showed the particular exhaustion that came from keeping people alive while everything around you tried to kill them. Someone had kept this photo for 8 years. Someone who knew exactly who she'd been and where she'd served. Emily's phone rang. Different unknown number. "What do you want?" she answered. "To make sure you understand the situation." The same voice from earlier, calm and measured. "You have skills people need. You also have secrets people can expose. The photograph is proof we can reach you anywhere, anytime. The question is whether you're smart enough to recognize an opportunity." This isn't an opportunity. It's blackmail. It's leverage. The Cordova network pays well for protection, and they're particularly interested in making sure certain investigations don't progress. Your assistance could be valuable. Emily's grip tightened on the phone. "You want me to sabotage the investigation into Marco Vega. I want you to understand that fighting against well-funded organizations with deep connections rarely ends well for the fighter. Walk away from this. Go back to being the quiet nurse nobody notices. Or we start sending your real history to people who'd be very interested in Sergeant Emily Garrett's classified service record." "Who are you?" "Someone who knows the value of skilled operators and the cost of unnecessary complications. You have 48 hours to decide which category you fall into." The line went dead again. Emily set the phone down and forced herself to think past the anger. 2 separate contacts within hours. Colonel Brennan offering recruitment and an unknown voice offering corruption. Both knew her real identity. Both wanted to use her. The difference was Brennan had come in person, while this second contact hid behind anonymity. That pattern suggested Brennan's offer was official, authorized, while the second was someone operating outside proper channels. Someone with access to classified information who was willing to sell it to criminal networks. Someone like the leaked Detective Briggs was hunting. Emily pulled out her laptop and spent the next 90 minutes doing research that would have been impossible without her military training. She accessed public databases, cross-referenced hospital employment records, and mapped financial transactions using techniques learned in intelligence briefings. Dr. Marcus Webb's gambling debts were real. She found court records of liens and settlements. His divorce was messy and expensive, but the photograph Brennan had shown her didn't prove corruption. It proved Webb had bad judgment about who he met with. She needed more. At 7 a.m., Emily showered and changed into fresh clothes. Sleep wasn't happening, and sitting still meant thinking about threats she couldn't immediately counter. Instead, she drove back to Riverside General and entered through the staff entrance like she was picking up an extra shift. Sarah was still there, looking exhausted but functional. "I thought you went home." "Couldn't sleep. Figured I'd help with the morning rush." Emily pulled on a fresh pair of scrubs from her locker. "How are the patients?" "Stable. Marco Vega got transferred out an hour ago. Federal marshals took him in an armored convoy that looked like something from a movie." Sarah lowered her voice. "Dr. Webb has been asking about you." "What kind of asking?" "The kind where he wants to know if you're coming back today and seems worried about the answer." Sarah hesitated. "Emily, is he involved in what happened last night?" The question was too perceptive for comfort. Emily finished changing and closed her locker. "Why would you think that?" "Because he was in the ER when those men arrived. Because he seemed to know exactly what they wanted before they said it. And because when you held that gun to Daniel Cross, Webb looked scared in a way that didn't match the situation." Sarah crossed her arms. "I've worked with him for 3 years. I know when he's lying." Emily studied the younger nurse who was proving to be far more observant than anyone gave her credit for. "If I asked you to watch him, could you do it without being obvious?" "Watch him how?" "Who he talks to. Who he calls." Whether he goes anywhere unusual during his shift. Emily kept her voice low. And if he accesses patient records he shouldn't be looking at. Sarah's eyes widened. You think he's the leak? I think someone with medical access fed information to the people who attacked Marco. And I think Webb is either that person or knows who is. Emily glanced toward the ER entrance. But I can't prove it without evidence. I'll help. Sarah pulled out her phone. I have access to the audit logs for patient records. If Webb or anyone else accessed Marco's file before the attack, it'll show timestamps and user IDs. Can you pull those without flagging attention? I'm the one who runs reports for compliance audits. Nobody questions when I access the system. Sarah was already typing. Give me 20 minutes. Emily returned to the ER floor where morning shift change was creating controlled chaos. New nurses arriving, night shift departing, patients being moved or discharged or admitted. Dr. Webb stood near the central station reviewing charts with the kind of focus that looked normal but felt performative. He saw Emily, and his expression shifted through several emotions too quickly. Surprise, relief, concern, something that might have been guilt. Dawson, didn't expect you back today. Couldn't stay away. Emily pulled up a patient chart on the nearest computer. Anything urgent? Standard morning cases, nothing we can't handle. Webb moved closer, lowering his voice. About last night and this morning, I meant what I said. I was wrong about you. You already apologized. I know, but I need you to understand that I'm going to make this right. The administrative review is dead. I'm recommending you for a senior nursing position that comes with better pay and scheduling authority. Webb's voice carried genuine contrition. You deserve recognition for what you did. Emily met his eyes and saw desperation there. A man trying too hard to make amends, offering rewards that felt disproportionate to the offense. Classic behavior for someone managing guilt about larger betrayals. That's generous, she said carefully. It's overdue. Webb glanced around, then continued quietly. I also want you to know that if anyone asks questions about your background, I'll support whatever story you give them. Military service, medical discharge, all of it. You have my word. The offer landed wrong. Emily's training had taught her to recognize when people were building plausible deniability, offering support that could later be framed as ignorance if consequences arrived. Webb wasn't just apologizing, he was protecting himself. Why would anyone ask questions? Emily asked. After what happened? The police, hospital administration, maybe even media? Webb's smile didn't reach his eyes. I just want you to know you have allies here. He walked away before Emily could respond. She watched him go, noting the tension in his shoulders and the way he checked his phone 3 times in as many minutes. Stressed, worried, guilty. Sarah appeared at her elbow. I found something. They moved to an empty consultation room. Sarah pulled up data on her tablet showing access logs for Marco Vega's patient file. The timestamps told a story. Routine medical staff access during treatment, then one outlier entry 14 minutes before the attack. Dr. Webb accessed Marco's file at 11:38 p.m., Sarah said. He viewed admission time, treatment location, and current status. Then he closed the file and made a phone call that lasted 90 seconds. Can you trace the call? Not without getting IT involved, and that would flag attention. Sarah scrolled through more data. But here's what's weird. Webb wasn't scheduled to be in the ER last night. He usually works days. He showed up around 11, claiming he wanted to check on departmental operations. Emily processed that. Webb had appeared in the ER shortly before an attack he couldn't have predicted unless he knew it was coming. He'd accessed patient information about the target, and now he was offering Emily protection and rewards that felt like buying silence. The pieces fit too well to ignore. I need to talk to Detective Briggs, Emily said. Now? Before Webb realizes we're looking at him. Emily called Briggs from her personal phone. He answered on the second ring, sounding tired. Dawson, you're up early. I have information about the hospital attack. Can we meet? I'm at the station. Come by whenever. Emily ended the call and turned to Sarah. Keep watching Webb. If he does anything unusual, text me immediately. Be careful. Emily left through the staff entrance and drove to the Marshall Point Police Department, a concrete building that looked like it had been designed by someone who hated aesthetics. Briggs met her in the lobby and escorted her to a conference room that smelled like old coffee and institutional cleaning products. "What do you have?" he asked. Emily laid out what she'd found: the access logs, Webb's unexpected presence in the ER, his financial problems, and the photograph Brennan had shown her. Briggs listened without interrupting, making notes on a legal pad. "That's circumstantial," he said when she finished. "Suggestive, but not proof. It's enough to establish pattern and motive." "Maybe. But I can't get a warrant based on a hunch and some financial records." Briggs tapped his pen against the pad. "I need something concrete. Communications with known Cordova associates, money transfers, something that proves he wasn't just checking on a patient." "What about the phone call he made after accessing Marco's file?" "We'd need a subpoena for phone records, and no judge is signing that without stronger evidence." Briggs leaned back in his chair. "Unless you can get Webb to incriminate himself directly." "You want me to wear a wire?" "I want you to have a conversation with someone you suspect of conspiracy to commit murder and see if he says anything useful." Briggs's expression was grim. "I know that's asking a lot, but you're in position to do what I can't." Emily thought about Colonel Brennan's recruitment offer and the anonymous caller's threats. Everyone wanted to use her position as leverage. Everyone assumed she'd be willing to risk herself for their agenda. The difference was this time, she'd be doing it for the right reasons. Marco Vega deserved justice. The patients who'd been terrorized deserved answers. And if Marcus Webb had sold information that nearly got people killed, he deserved consequences. "What do I need to do?" Emily asked. Briggs pulled a small device from his desk drawer. "This is a recording unit. Clips to your waistband, microphone hidden in the button of your scrubs. It'll capture everything within 10 feet with reasonable clarity. And if he finds it, then you're having a very bad day and I'm sending backup immediately." Briggs met her eyes. "I won't sugarcoat this. If Webb is dirty and he realizes you're investigating him, you become a liability he might try to eliminate. Are you prepared for that risk?" Emily had been a liability worth eliminating in war zones where the consequences were more immediate than anything Marcus Webb could arrange. But those situations had involved clear enemies and defined rules of engagement. This was different: civilian law, hospital politics, and threats that came wrapped in professional courtesy. "I'm prepared," she said. Briggs helped her set up the recording device. The microphone was nearly invisible, integrated into the second button of her scrub top. The recording unit itself was small enough to hide in her waistband, positioned where normal movement wouldn't dislodge it. "Test it," Briggs said. Emily spoke a few sentences. The playback was clear, picking up her voice with minimal background noise. Good enough for legal purposes if she could get Webb to say something incriminating. "How do I steer the conversation?" she asked. "Start general. Thank him for dropping the administrative review. Build rapport. Then mention you're worried about retaliation from the Cordova network." Briggs handed her an earpiece. "I'll be monitoring in real time from a surveillance van in the hospital parking lot. If things go wrong, say the phrase, 'I need to check on bed 7, and I'll send backup immediately." Emily pocketed the earpiece. "Anything else?" "Yeah, don't get killed. That generates paperwork I really don't want to fill out." The attempt at humor fell flat, but Emily appreciated the effort. She drove back to Riverside General with the recording equipment active, testing words and phrases to make sure everything worked. By the time she arrived, her shift was officially starting, and the ER had filled with its usual morning cases. Webb was in his office, visible through the glass partition that separated him from the chaos outside. Emily knocked once and entered without waiting for permission. "We need to talk," she said. Webb looked up from his computer, surprise crossing his features. "Of course. Close the door." Emily shut the door and sat across from him. The recording device was active, capturing every word. "I wanted to thank you for dropping the review and for the job offer." "You earned it." Webb's smile was thin. "After last night, it's the least I could do." "I'm worried, though." "About what?" Emily leaned forward slightly, projecting concern. "The men who attacked the hospital. Daniel Cross and his crew. They were looking for Marco Vega, and they knew exactly when and where to find him. That kind of intelligence doesn't come from nowhere. Webb's expression didn't change, but his hands moved slightly, a tell that he was processing the implications. The police are investigating. I know, Detective Briggs thinks there might be an internal leak, someone with access to patient records who fed information to the Cordova network. Emily watched his face carefully. That's terrifying. The idea that someone we work with could be involved in something like that. It's just speculation. Is it? Because the attack was too precise. They knew Marco's admission time, his location, even the fact that he'd agreed to testify. Emily paused. Someone told them. Someone with inside access. Webb shifted in his chair. Why are you telling me this? Because I'm scared. If there's a leak, and if the Cordova network thinks I'm a threat because I stopped their attack, then I need to know who I can trust. Emily met his eyes. Can I trust you, Dr. Webb? The question hung in the air. Webb's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. When he spoke, his voice carried an edge that hadn't been there before. Of course you can trust me. I run this department. I protect my staff. Even when protecting them is complicated? What does that mean? Emily took a calculated risk. It means sometimes people get into situations they didn't plan for. Financial problems, bad decisions, pressure from people who don't take no for an answer. She kept her voice sympathetic. I know about the gambling debts, Marcus, and the divorce settlements. That kind of pressure makes people do things they wouldn't normally consider. Webb went very still. Who told you about that? It's public record. Court filings, property liens. Anyone looking would find it. Emily softened her expression. I'm not judging. I'm trying to understand if you're in trouble, because if you are, maybe I can help. Help how? By not asking questions about why you were in the ER last night when you weren't scheduled, or why you accessed Marco Vega's patient file 14 minutes before the attack, or who you called immediately afterward. Emily watched realization dawn on his face. I saw the access logs, Marcus. I know. Webb stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. You're accusing me of working with criminals? I'm saying the evidence suggests you had advanced knowledge of the attack, and that maybe you didn't have a choice about providing that knowledge. Emily stood to face him. If someone was threatening you, forcing you to cooperate, that's different than being a willing participant. That's something we can work with. Get out of my office. Marcus, I said get out. Webb's voice rose. You have no idea what you're talking about. No idea what's actually happening here. Emily stayed calm. Then tell me. Help me understand. For a moment, Webb looked like he might break. His face showed the particular desperation of someone trapped between bad options with no clear escape. Then his expression hardened. You want to know what's happening? Fine. Yes, I accessed Marco's file. Yes, I made a phone call, because I was told that if I didn't provide that information, my daughter would be hurt. Webb's voice cracked slightly. She's 15 years old and lives with my ex-wife in Seattle. And 3 weeks ago, someone showed me photographs of her walking to school, sitting in class, having coffee with friends. They knew her schedule, they knew everything, and they said if I didn't cooperate, she'd disappear. Emily felt her certainty waver. Who threatened you? I don't know. Phone calls from blocked numbers, emails from anonymous accounts. They knew about my debts, my divorce, every mistake I've ever made. Webb collapsed back into his chair. They said all I had to do was provide patient information when they asked. Just simple data. Admission times, treatment locations, nothing that would directly hurt anyone. But it did hurt someone. It nearly got Marco Vega killed. I know. Webb's voice was barely above a whisper. I know what I did. But what was I supposed to do? Let my daughter get kidnapped? Killed? She's my child, Emily. I couldn't... He stopped, breathing hard. The recording device was capturing everything. Emily's training said to push harder, get more details, extract a full confession. But something else, the part of her that had become a nurse to help people instead of hurt them, recognized genuine anguish when she saw it. We need to tell Detective Briggs, she said gently. And say what? That I helped criminals attack a hospital because they threatened my family? I'll lose my medical license, go to prison, and my daughter will still be in danger because the Cordova network doesn't forgive people who talk to police. You don't have options here, Marcus. Either you cooperate with law enforcement and they protect your daughter, or you keep quiet and eventually this destroys you anyway. Webb laughed bitterly. You think the police can protect her? You think they can stop an organization with resources and reach that makes local law enforcement look like children playing dress-up? He shook his head. The only thing keeping her safe right now is my continued cooperation. Emily's earpiece crackled softly, Briggs listening to every word. She made a decision that probably violated half the instruction she'd been given. What if I told you there's another option? Webb looked up. What option? People who can actually protect your daughter, real protection, not just police promises. Emily sat down again. The federal government has resources that go beyond local departments. Witness protection, secure relocation, counter-surveillance operations. If you testify against the Cordova network and help identify who threatened you, they can make your daughter disappear in ways that even organized crime can't track. And I'm supposed to trust that? More than you trust criminals who've already proven they'll use your family as leverage whenever it's convenient. Emily leaned forward. You made a bad choice under terrible circumstances. But it's not too late to make a better one. Webb was silent for a long time. When he spoke, his voice carried resignation. They told me there'd be consequences if I talked. Permanent ones. For you or your daughter? Both. They were very clear about the order things would happen. Webb rubbed his face. I'm already dead. I just haven't stopped breathing yet. Emily's earpiece crackled again. Briggs' voice came through quietly. Tell him I'm outside. Tell him we can start the protection process immediately. Detective Briggs is here, Emily said. He's been listening, and he's ready to help if you're ready to talk. Webb looked at her with something between betrayal and relief. You were recording this whole time. Yes. Of course you were. He laughed without humor. Sergeant Emily Garrett, I looked you up after the attack, found your real service record through a friend at the VA. You're not just a combat medic. You were attached to special operations, intelligence gathering, counterinsurgency operations. Webb's eyes were hollow. You've been playing me this entire time. I've been trying to stop people from getting killed. There's a difference. Before Webb could respond, his office door opened. Detective Briggs entered with two uniformed officers, his expression professional. Dr. Marcus Webb, I need you to come with me for questioning regarding your involvement in the attack on Riverside General Hospital. Webb stood slowly. Am I under arrest? Not yet, but I strongly recommend you cooperate fully and immediately. Briggs gestured toward the door. We can discuss protection for your daughter on the way to the station. They escorted Webb out through the administrative corridor, avoiding the main ER where staff and patients would ask questions. Emily followed at a distance, removing the recording equipment once they were clear of the department. Sarah intercepted her near the staff entrance. What happened? Webb confessed. He was being blackmailed into providing patient information. Emily handed the recording device to one of Briggs' officers. His daughter was threatened. Oh my God. Sarah's expression shifted from anger to sympathy. That's awful. It's complicated. Emily pulled off the microphone-equipped scrub top and changed into a regular shirt from her locker. He made terrible choices, but he made them for understandable reasons. What happens now? Before Emily could answer, her phone rang, the same unknown number from the morning calls. She answered on speaker so Briggs could hear. You made a mistake, the voice said without preamble. We told you to walk away. Instead, you just cost us a valuable asset and exposed operational security. Who is this? Emily asked. Someone who's done being patient with you. The voice hardened. Dr. Webb was supposed to provide ongoing intelligence. Now that's gone, which means you owe us compensation. Briggs was already signaling his officers, mouthing instructions about tracing the call. Emily kept the conversation going. I don't owe you anything. You owe us Marco Vega. He's in federal custody, but custody can be penetrated. You're going to help us find him. Not a chance. Then we'll go after targets you do care about. The voice paused. Sarah Richmond, age 27, lives alone in apartment 2B at Cedar Grove Residences. Jeremy Costa, age 25, lives with his mother at 847 Oakmont Drive. Should I continue? Emily's blood went cold. They were threatening her colleagues, people who'd done nothing except work in the same hospital. Don't, she said. Then cooperate. You have military intelligence training. You have contacts in federal law enforcement. Use those resources to locate Marco Vega and provide us with his location within 24 hours, or we start eliminating people you know, starting with the pretty young nurse who seems to think you're worth protecting." The line went dead. Briggs lowered his radio, expression grim. "Trace got a general location, but not specific. The call came from somewhere in the downtown area, probably using a burner phone with routing through multiple towers." Emily's mind raced through threat assessment and response options. "They know too much. Patient records, staff addresses, my real identity. This isn't just the Cordova network. Someone with serious access is coordinating this." "The sixth person," Briggs said, "the one Marco mentioned. Someone with connections to both criminal organizations and federal databases." Sarah's face had gone pale. "They threatened me specifically?" "They threatened everyone close to me." Emily turned to Briggs. "You need to provide protection. Safe houses, security details, whatever it takes." "I can arrange that, but it'll take time to coordinate resources." Briggs pulled out his phone. "And we need to find this coordinator before they make good on the threats." Emily's earpiece, still active from the earlier surveillance, crackled with a different voice. "Colonel Brennan." "Sergeant Garrett, I've been monitoring the situation. We need to talk, immediately." "How are you on this frequency?" Emily demanded. "Because we've been running parallel surveillance on this investigation since last night, and the person threatening you just confirmed our worst suspicions." Brennan's voice carried urgency. "Meet me at the north parking structure, top level, 5 minutes, come alone." The transmission ended. Emily looked at Briggs. "Did you hear that?" "Yeah, and I don't like it. This whole thing is escalating too fast with too many players." Briggs holstered his weapon. "I'm coming with you." He said alone. "And I say I don't trust military intelligence operations that conveniently intersect with active criminal investigations." Briggs headed for the exit. "Let's go." They drove to the north parking structure in separate vehicles, Briggs in an unmarked police car, Emily in her own. The top level was empty except for a black SUV with government plates. Colonel Brennan stood beside it wearing civilian clothes instead of his uniform, which immediately told Emily this meeting was off books. Briggs parked but stayed in his vehicle, watching. Emily approached Brennan alone. "Talk," she said. "The person coordinating the Cordova Network's operations is someone you know. Someone with military background and federal access who's been selling information to criminal organizations for at least 18 months. Brennan pulled out a tablet showing surveillance footage. Someone who was at Riverside General last night during the attack. The footage showed a figure in hospital scrubs, moving through corridors with purpose, avoiding cameras with the kind of spatial awareness that came from professional training. The angle was wrong for facial identification, but something about the movement pattern was familiar. "Who is it?" Emily asked. Brennan switched to a different image, a personnel file with a face that made Emily's stomach drop. Captain Jennifer Wade, former Army intelligence officer, currently employed as a consultant for Homeland Security with clearance levels that granted access to protected witness databases, classified military records, and federal investigation files. Emily had served with her in Afghanistan. They'd worked the same operations, shared the same briefings, trusted each other with their lives in environments where betrayal meant death. "That's not possible," Emily said. "It's confirmed. We've been investigating Wade for 6 months on suspicion of selling classified information. Last night's attack gave us the evidence we needed to prove it." Brennan's expression was hard. She accessed Marco Vega's protected witness file 3 hours before the hospital assault. She pulled your sealed military records 2 days ago, and she made calls to known Cordova associates from secured government phones using routing protocols designed to avoid detection. Emily felt the ground shift beneath her certainties. Why? Money. Lots of it. Wade has offshore accounts totaling nearly $3 million, all funded through information brokering to criminal organizations, foreign intelligence services, and corporate espionage clients. Brennan closed the tablet. She's been selling out operations, compromising witnesses, and getting people killed for profit. And she's threatening my colleagues to force my cooperation. She's eliminating loose ends. You exposed her asset when you got Webb to confess. Now she's trying to salvage the situation by either recruiting you or removing you. Brennan met Emily's eyes. "We need to bring her in, tonight, before she makes good on her threats or disappears completely." "How?" "She doesn't know we've identified her yet. She thinks she's still operating in shadow. We can use that." Brennan pulled out a phone. You're going to call her. Tell her you're willing to cooperate. Set up a meeting to discuss terms. And when she shows up, we'll be waiting. Emily looked at the phone. She'll see through that. Not if you sell it right. She knows you're protective of civilians. She knows you have military training that makes you valuable. Play to both those things. Tell her you'll help locate Marco Vega in exchange for guaranteed safety for your colleagues. Brennan's voice hardened. Make her believe you're making the practical choice to protect people you care about. It was a trap built on exploitation of character, using Emily's demonstrated willingness to protect others as bait. Jennifer Wade would recognize the logic because she'd worked with Emily long enough to know how she thought. What's the tactical setup? Emily asked. We'll have a sniper team, tactical support, and electronic surveillance. The meeting location will be isolated with multiple containment points. Wade won't have escape routes. Brennan gestured to the SUV. Full operational support, no civilian casualties, clean extraction. Emily thought about Sarah's face when the threats were made, about Jeremy's guilt from freezing during the attack, about all the patients who'd been caught in crossfire because people like Jennifer Wade decided profit mattered more than lives. Give me the phone, she said. Brennan handed it over. Emily dialed the number that had called her twice that morning, her voice steady as it connected. I'm listening, Wade's voice answered. This is Emily. I'm ready to talk about your offer. Wade's silence stretched for 3 seconds that felt longer. When she spoke again, her voice carried cautious interest. Smart choice. Where and when? The old Morrison Street warehouse district, Building 12, the one they were supposed to demolish last year but ran out of funding. Emily kept her tone flat, businesslike. 1 hour, just you and me. You think I'm stupid enough to walk into an ambush? I think you're smart enough to recognize when someone's making a practical decision. Emily glanced at Brennan, who was already signaling his team through a handheld radio. You want Marco Vega's location. I want guaranteed safety for people I care about. That requires face-to-face negotiation with someone who actually has authority to make promises stick. And if I don't show, then you lose your best chance at salvaging this situation before federal investigators close in on whatever trails you've left. Emily let that implication settle. Dr. Webb is talking to Detective Briggs right now. How long before that conversation leads somewhere you don't want it to go? Wade made a sound that might have been frustration or grudging respect. 1 hour, Building 12. If I see anyone besides you, the deal's off and your nurse friend becomes a cautionary tale. The line went dead. Emily handed the phone back to Brennan. She'll come, but she'll have counter-surveillance and an exit strategy. We'll be ready. Brennan was already moving toward the SUV. Tactical team deploys in 20 minutes. Snipers take elevated positions in adjacent buildings. Electronic countermeasures jam her communications. You wear a wire and keep her talking until we have clear containment. She'll scan for wires. Then we use bone conduction. Brennan pulled equipment from the SUV, a small device that would transmit through skeletal vibrations instead of traditional microphones. Harder to detect, harder to jam. This goes behind your ear. Looks like a hearing aid if she notices. Emily let him attach the device while Briggs approached from his vehicle. The detective's expression was tight, with the kind of concern that came from watching civilians get pulled into operations that could turn lethal. This is federal jurisdiction now, Briggs said to Brennan. My department should be coordinating. Your department doesn't have clearance for operations involving compromised Homeland Security personnel. Brennan's tone was polite but absolute. You can observe from the command vehicle, but tactical decisions are mine. Briggs looked like he wanted to argue, then noticed something in Emily's expression. You okay with this? Emily considered the question. Nothing about this was okay. Confronting a former comrade turned traitor, wearing surveillance equipment into a meeting that could end in bullets, gambling that Brennan's team could contain someone with Jennifer Wade's training. But okay wasn't the standard anymore. Necessary was. I'm okay, she said. 20 minutes later, Emily drove toward the Morrison Street warehouse district while Brennan's tactical team positioned themselves in shadow. The bone conduction device transmitted her breathing, her heartbeat, every small sound her body made. She could hear Brennan's voice occasionally giving positioning updates to his snipers. Alpha team in position, northeast corner, 80 meters. Bravo team set, southwest rooftop, clear sightlines. The warehouse district was a graveyard of industrial ambition, 6 square blocks of abandoned buildings waiting for demolition or renovation that never came. Building 12 sat in the center, a 4-story concrete structure with broken windows and graffiti marking territorial claims from gangs that had moved on years ago. Emily parked in the designated lot and approached on foot. The area was silent except for wind moving through empty spaces. Her training automatically mapped exits, cover positions, potential ambush points. Wade would be doing the same calculation from wherever she was observing. The building's main entrance was a roll-up door hanging half open. Emily stepped inside and let her eyes adjust to dimmer light. The interior was vast, empty floor space where machinery had once stood, support pillars creating shadows, a metal staircase leading to upper levels. Perfect for surveillance, terrible for containment. "I'm here," Emily said quietly, knowing the bone conduction device would pick it up. Wade's voice came from above. "Second floor, come alone." Emily climbed the metal stairs with steady steps, her hands visible and empty. The second floor opened into what had been administrative offices. Cubicle walls still standing like tombstones for dead careers, papers scattered across floors, evidence of homeless encampments in corners. Jennifer Wade stood near the far window, backlit by afternoon sun filtering through dirty glass. She looked different than Emily remembered, harder, leaner, with the particular wariness that came from living in constant operational mode. She held a pistol loosely at her side, not aimed, but ready. "You're wired," Wade said. "Of course I am. You'd be disappointed if I wasn't." "Show me." Emily turned slowly, lifting her shirt to show she wasn't wearing a traditional wire. Wade's eyes scanned for earpieces, transmitters, anything obvious. The bone conduction device behind Emily's ear was small enough to pass as a medical device, if noticed at all. "Clean enough," Wade said. "Or you're using tech I haven't seen yet. Either way, let's make this quick. What do you want?" Guaranteed safety for Sarah Richmond and Jeremy Costa. Written assurance they're off limits regardless of how this investigation proceeds. Emily kept her voice level. "In exchange, I'll provide intelligence on Marco Vega's protection detail and current location." "You don't have that intelligence." "I have contacts who do. Military channels that bypass civilian law enforcement." Emily moved closer, reading Wade's body language for tells. "Colonel Brennan offered me a consulting position this morning, access to federal witness protection databases in exchange for assisting with operational security assessments." It was a lie wrapped in enough truth to be plausible. Wade's expression showed calculation, weighing whether Emily would actually betray her principles for protection of others. "Why should I believe you'd flip that fast?" "Because I spent 11 months being treated like I was incompetent by people who didn't know what I could do. And when I finally showed them, it exposed me to exactly the kind of attention I'd spent years avoiding." Emily let frustration bleed into her voice. "You threatened people I work with. You dug up my classified service record. You backed me into a corner where cooperation is the only option that doesn't end with collateral damage. So yes, I'm flipping, because that's the practical choice." Wade studied her for a long moment. In the silence, Emily could hear Brennan's voice through the bone conduction device, so quiet it was almost subliminal. "Sniper teams have target acquisition, waiting on your signal." "You always were pragmatic," Wade said finally. "That's what made you good in the field. No hesitation when decisions needed making, no second-guessing after." She moved away from the window, circling slowly. "But here's my problem. Dr. Webb already confessed to Detective Briggs. That creates a paper trail leading toward people who've paid very well for anonymity. Those people are unhappy. They want assurances that additional leaks won't happen." "What kind of assurances?" "The kind that ends with you disappearing before you can testify about anything." Wade's pistol came up slightly, not quite aimed but no longer casual. "The Cordova Network has offered a substantial bounty for your permanent removal from this equation, and I'm having trouble seeing why I shouldn't collect it." Emily's pulse stayed steady through trained control. "Because killing me creates more problems than it solves. Federal investigators already know I was involved in stopping the hospital attack. If I disappear, that generates the exact scrutiny you're trying to avoid. Not if it looks like gang retaliation. The Cordova Network has motive. They have history of eliminating witnesses. Your body found in a location consistent with their operational patterns wouldn't surprise anyone. Wade's smile was cold. You'd be a tragic casualty of organized crime violence. Very neat. Through the bone conduction device, Brennan's voice carried urgency. Say the phrase, "We're moving in." Emily held Wade's stare. You're forgetting something. What's that? I'm not the same person you served with in Kandahar. That version of me still believed following orders mattered more than asking why. Emily's voice hardened. This version knows exactly what you are. A traitor selling out people who trusted you. Someone who got soldiers killed for money. Someone who threatened civilians because it was convenient. Wade's expression shifted. Recognition that Emily wasn't negotiating anymore. You think you're better than me? I think I chose a different path when I had the same options you did. We both left military service. We both had skills that could be monetized. I became a nurse. You became this. Emily gestured at the warehouse around them. So yeah, I'm better than you, not because I'm special, just because I didn't sell my integrity to criminals. Integrity doesn't pay off gambling debts or medical bills or any of the real problems civilians face. Wade's voice carried genuine anger now. You chose nursing because you could afford to be noble. Some of us didn't have that luxury. You have $3 million in offshore accounts. Don't pretend this was about survival. Wade went still. How do you know about those accounts? Because Colonel Brennan's team has been investigating you for 6 months. Because they've traced every transaction, every communication, every piece of evidence showing you've been selling classified information to enemy networks. Emily took a step forward. You're done, Jennifer. The only question is whether you walk out of here in handcuffs or a body bag. For a moment, Wade's professional mask slipped enough to show the calculation underneath. Fight or flight. Eliminate the threat or cut losses and run. Her pistol started to rise toward Emily. 3 things happened simultaneously. Glass shattered in the far window as a sniper round took Wade's weapon hand. She screamed and dropped the pistol. Tactical teams breached through multiple entry points, boots hammering on metal stairs. And Emily moved forward with the muscle memory of someone who'd disarmed opponents in closer quarters than this, catching Wade's injured hand and twisting her down to the concrete floor. Don't move, Emily said quietly. Wade struggled for maybe 2 seconds before tactical operators surrounded them with rifles and shouted commands. They pulled Emily back and secured Wade with professional efficiency, hands cuffed behind her back, injury assessed and bandaged, rights read in the flat tone of people who'd done this hundreds of times. Brennan entered through the main stairwell, his expression neutral. Captain Jennifer Wade, you're under arrest for treason, conspiracy to commit murder, and unauthorized disclosure of classified information. Additional charges pending. Wade laughed through pain. This won't stick. I have lawyers. I have connections. I have information that people in very high places would prefer stayed quiet. Then you'll have an interesting trial. Brennan gestured to his team. Get her out of here. They hauled Wade to her feet and escorted her down the stairs. Her protests faded into distance. Emily stood in the empty office space, breathing steady despite adrenaline crash trying to happen. Brennan approached her. You did good work. I got lucky she talked instead of shooting. Luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. You were prepared. Brennan glanced toward where his team had taken Wade. Her arrest triggers a broader investigation. Everyone she sold information to, every operation she compromised, every person who died because of her betrayal. It'll take months to unravel. What about the Cordova network? Marco Vega's testimony combined with Webb's cooperation and Wade's arrest gives prosecutors enough to dismantle their entire infrastructure. Warrants are being executed as we speak. By tomorrow morning, 50 people will be in custody. Brennan met her eyes. You broke this open. All of it. Emily didn't feel victorious. She felt exhausted and angry and relieved in measures that didn't balance into anything simple. What happens to Dr. Webb? He'll face charges for his role in providing patient information. But given the circumstances, coercion, threats against his daughter, prosecutors will likely offer a deal. Testimony in exchange for reduced sentence. Maybe probation if he's lucky. Brennan's expression softened slightly. His daughter is already in protective custody. She'll be relocated under new identity once this is resolved. And Sarah and Jeremy? No longer targets. With Wade in custody and the Cordova network collapsed, there's no threat remaining. Brennan gestured toward the exit. You should go home. Get sleep. This is over. Emily descended the metal stairs into fading afternoon light. Detective Briggs waited in the parking lot, leaning against his unmarked car. Hell of a thing to watch, he said. You saw? Command vehicle feed. Heard every word. Briggs straightened. For what it's worth, you handled that better than most trained operators would have. Kept her talking, didn't give anything away, positioned yourself perfectly for tactical intervention. I had good training. Yeah, you did. Briggs pulled out a business card and handed it to her. If you ever want to do consulting work for law enforcement, real consulting, not the kind that gets you shot at, give me a call. We could use someone with your background. Emily pocketed the card without committing. I'm just a nurse. Right. And I'm just a cop. Briggs smiled slightly. We both know that's not the whole story, but it's the story we're sticking with. He got in his car and drove away. Emily stood alone in the parking lot as tactical teams finished securing the warehouse and packing equipment. The operation was over. The threat neutralized. Justice served. So why did it feel incomplete? Her phone rang. Sarah's number. Are you okay? Sarah asked immediately. I'm fine. Everything's resolved. The person making threats has been arrested. I heard. It's all over the hospital. Federal agents showed up and took Dr. Webb into custody. Then more agents came and started seizing computers and files. Sarah's voice carried confusion and relief mixed together. What happened? Webb was being blackmailed into providing patient information. The person blackmailing him was arrested today. The whole thing's collapsed. Emily started walking toward her car. You and Jeremy are safe. No more threats. Because of you. Because a lot of people did their jobs. Emily unlocked her car and got inside. I need to go home. I'll see you tomorrow. She ended the call before Sarah could ask more questions. The drive back to her apartment happened on autopilot, her mind processing everything that had occurred in the past 24 hours. The attack, the investigation, the revelation of Wade's betrayal, the trap that ended with arrests and justice. But something nagged at her, a detail that didn't fit the pattern. Emily parked in her building's lot and climbed to her third-floor apartment. Everything appeared normal, nothing disturbed. She locked the door and stood in the middle of her living room trying to identify what was bothering her. Then she saw it, an envelope on her kitchen counter, plain white, unsealed, sitting exactly where someone would place it if they wanted to make sure she noticed. Emily approached slowly, her training screaming warnings. Nobody had keys to her apartment except the building manager. Nobody should have been inside. She opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a single photograph, recent, high resolution, showing Emily and Colonel Brennan in the parking structure earlier that day. The angle suggested it was taken from an adjacent rooftop with telephoto lens. On the back, handwritten, Jennifer Wade was the middleman, not the source. We're still watching. Emily's blood went cold. She pulled out her phone and called Brennan. We have a problem, she said when he answered. What kind of problem? Someone was in my apartment. They left a photograph showing us meeting this morning with a message saying Wade was just the middleman, that there's still a source feeding her information. But Brennan was silent for several seconds. Forward me a photo of the message. Don't touch anything else. I'm sending a team to your location. Emily photographed the message and sent it. Then she stood in her living room with her back to the wall and her eyes on the door, waiting for whoever was playing this game to make their next move. 20 minutes later, federal agents swept her apartment for surveillance devices and found 3. One in her smoke detector, one in her bedroom lamp, one disguised as a phone charger in her kitchen. Professional installations. Recent placement. Someone had been watching her for days at minimum. Brennan arrived as his team was bagging evidence. His expression was harder than she'd seen it all day. This changes everything, he said. Wade couldn't have placed these devices herself. She's been in Seattle running operations for the past week. Someone local had physical access to your apartment. Building management? We'll check. But I'm thinking someone with better resources. Brennan looked at the devices being cataloged. These are military-grade surveillance, the kind we use for high-value intelligence operations. which means whoever placed them has access to restricted equipment and knows how to deploy it without triggering security alerts. Emily thought about the timing, the devices found in her apartment, the photograph delivered during a federal operation, the message suggesting deeper conspiracy. You think there's another leak? I think Jennifer Wade was selling information she received from someone higher up the chain, someone who's still active and still feeding intelligence to hostile networks. Brennan met her eyes. Someone who knew about today's operation and photographed us meeting to make sure we understand they're still in control. The implications settled like lead. They'd arrested Wade and collapsed the Cordova network, but the source feeding both operations was still free, still watching, still dangerous. What do you need from me? Emily asked. I need you to act like nothing's changed. Go back to work tomorrow. Resume normal life. Be the nurse who stopped a hospital attack and helped catch a traitor. Brennan's voice dropped. And I need you to help us identify who had access to place these devices. Because whoever did is the person we're really hunting. Emily looked at the surveillance equipment being cataloged as evidence, proof that her home had been violated, her privacy stripped, her life monitored by someone who understood her value as either an asset or a threat. The fight wasn't over. It had just evolved into something more dangerous because the enemy was invisible and embedded in systems she couldn't see. Okay, she said. What's the plan? Brennan pulled out a tablet showing a list of personnel with security clearances high enough to access military surveillance equipment. The list was longer than Emily expected. Dozens of names spanning military intelligence, Homeland Security, FBI, and contracted civilian specialists. We narrow this list by cross-referencing who had physical opportunity to access your apartment, who knew about today's operation, and who benefits from keeping Wade's network operational. Brennan highlighted several names. But that takes time. Meanwhile, whoever placed these devices knows we found them. They know we're hunting them, which makes you exposed. Then use that. Emily studied the list. If they think I'm exposed, they might make a move to either recruit me or eliminate me. Either option reveals them. That's using you as bait. I've been bait before. Emily met his eyes. And this time, I know the trap is coming. Brennan's expression showed the calculation of someone weighing operational risk against potential gain. Using yourself as bait means accepting you might not survive the exposure. I survived worse in places where backup was hours away and extraction wasn't guaranteed. Emily returned her attention to the personnel list on his tablet. This time I have resources. Use them. All right, but we do this controlled. Brennan began typing on his phone. Starting tomorrow, you go back to normal shifts at Riverside General. We plan information suggesting you're still investigating, asking questions about Wade's network. Meanwhile, I position surveillance teams watching everyone who monitors your movements. And when the source makes contact, we identify them, document everything, and move in with overwhelming force. Brennan looked up from his phone. But Emily, understand what you're agreeing to. Whoever placed those surveillance devices has proven they can reach you in your home. They have resources, training, and motivation to either flip you or eliminate you. The next 48 hours could get very dangerous very fast. Emily thought about Marco Vega fighting for his life because someone had sold his location, about Dr. Webb being coerced into betrayal through threats against his daughter, about Jennifer Wade choosing money over integrity and getting soldiers killed in the process, about all the damage one person could cause when they decided profit mattered more than people. I understand, she said. The federal team finished processing her apartment and left with bags of evidence and assurances that additional surveillance would monitor the building. Brennan departed last, leaving Emily alone in a space that no longer felt secure. She checked every window lock, wedged a chair under the doorknob, and sat awake until dawn with her military training running threat assessments on every sound. Morning came gray and cold. Emily dressed in fresh scrubs and drove to Riverside General with her mirrors constantly checked and her awareness heightened. The hospital parking lot looked normal. Staff arriving for day shift, visitors heading to early appointments, delivery trucks dropping off supplies. Nothing obviously wrong, which meant nothing. Sarah intercepted her 30 seconds after she walked through the staff entrance. You look terrible. Didn't sleep much. Because of what happened yesterday? Sarah's concern was genuine. I heard federal agents arrested someone high up in Homeland Security, someone who knew you from the military. Word traveled fast in hospitals. Emily wondered how much of the story had leaked and how much was speculation filling gaps. It's complicated. Everything with you is complicated. Sarah walked with her toward the locker room. But you're okay? Actually, okay, not just saying it? Emily considered lying, then decided Sarah deserved better. I'm okay enough to work. The rest I'm figuring out as I go. That's the most honest thing you've said to me in 11 months. Sarah's smile was small but real. If you need anything, and I mean anything, you tell me. Deal? Deal. The shift started with standard chaos. A child with a broken arm from playground equipment, an elderly man with pneumonia, a construction worker who'd caught his hand in machinery and needed immediate surgical consult. Emily moved through cases with practiced efficiency while her awareness tracked everyone in the department. Dr. Webb's absence was notable. He was still in federal custody, his office sealed with evidence tape. The administrative staff whispered about investigations and arrests. Residents looked nervous. Even Jeremy Costa moved differently, less casual and more alert after everything that had happened. Around 11 a.m., Detective Briggs appeared near the nurses' station. He gestured for Emily to follow him to an empty consultation room. We have a development, he said once the door closed. Jennifer Wade started talking. Not everything, but enough to confirm there was someone above her providing classified intelligence she then sold to criminal networks. Did she identify them? No, she claimed she never met them directly. All communications were encrypted, routed through anonymous servers, conducted through channels designed for deniability. Briggs pulled out his notebook. But she did mention something interesting. Her handler, the person providing intelligence, used a specific phrase during communications, a military code reference that Wade recognized from operational briefings she attended 3 years ago. Emily leaned forward. What phrase? Blackbird Protocol. Mean anything to you? The words hit like ice water. Emily's mind raced back to classified operations in Afghanistan, to briefings about exfiltration procedures and emergency extraction codes. Blackbird Protocol was a classified designation for high-value asset protection used when moving witnesses, evacuating intelligence officers, or securing personnel whose capture would compromise entire operations. That's classified above top secret, Emily said quietly. Only people with specific clearances would know that terminology, which narrows our suspect pool considerably. Briggs made notes. We're cross-referencing everyone with access to those classification levels against people who had opportunity to place surveillance in your apartment. The list is getting shorter. How short? 4 names, all military intelligence or Homeland Security personnel, all with credentials that would let them access restricted equipment and classified databases. Briggs looked up. Colonel Brennan is interviewing them today. We should have answers by tonight. Emily processed that timeline. Whoever had placed the surveillance devices knew investigators were closing in, knew they had maybe hours before exposure, which meant they'd either run or make a desperate move to eliminate the investigation. I need to get back to work, Emily said. Be careful. If our suspect realizes we're this close, they might try to tie up loose ends. I know. Emily headed for the door. That's what I'm counting on. She returned to the ER floor, where afternoon shift was building toward the usual evening rush. Sarah was managing a teenage girl with a dislocated shoulder. Jeremy was escorting a belligerent drunk to a holding area. The rhythm of emergency medicine continued despite federal investigations and criminal conspiracies because people kept needing care regardless of larger contexts. Emily pulled up charts and started working through cases when her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Parking garage. Level 3. 5 minutes. Come alone or people start dying. Emily stared at the message for exactly 3 seconds. Then she forwarded it to Brennan and Briggs simultaneously before pocketing her phone and heading for the stairs. She didn't tell Sarah where she was going, didn't alert security, just moved with quiet purpose toward whatever confrontation was waiting. The parking garage connected to the hospital through an elevated walkway. Level 3 was half empty at this hour, visitors who'd arrived early, staff who worked unusual shifts. Emily emerged from the stairwell and scanned for threats. A figure stood beside a black sedan near the far wall. Male, approximately 6 feet, wearing civilian clothes but moving with military bearing. As Emily approached, recognition hit. Major Ryan Foster. She'd served with him in Afghanistan during her second deployment. He'd been liaison between special operations and intelligence units, the person who coordinated information flow and made sure critical data reached people who needed it. They'd worked dozens of missions together. She'd trusted him with her life. "Ryan," Emily said carefully. "Emily, or should I say Sergeant Garrett?" Foster's smile was bitter. "Hard to keep track of all your names." "What are you doing here?" "Tying up loose ends before everything I've built falls apart." Foster leaned against the sedan casually, but his hand stayed near his jacket where Emily assumed he carried a weapon. Jennifer Wade was supposed to be invisible, a middleman who provided information to clients without anyone tracing back to the source, and she was good at it for almost 2 years. Then you had to go and be a hero. Emily's mind raced through implications. Foster had clearance for Blackbird Protocol, had access to military surveillance equipment, had opportunity to place devices in her apartment because he'd been stationed at Joint Base Lewis McChord, less than 2 hours from Marshall Point. He fit every parameter Briggs had outlined. "You're the leak," Emily said. "I'm an entrepreneur. There's a difference." Foster's voice carried the particular arrogance of someone who'd convinced himself that betrayal was actually sophisticated business. The military wastes intelligence. Critical information gets buried in bureaucracy, while people who'd actually pay for it go without. I just created a more efficient market. You got people killed. People die in war zones regardless. At least I profited from the inevitability. Foster pushed off the sedan. But then you stopped the hospital attack, exposed Wade, got Dr. Webb to confess. And now federal investigators are 12 hours from connecting dots that lead straight to me. So here's the situation. You're going to come with me. We're going to disappear into networks I've spent years building, and you're going to use your combat medical skills to keep certain high-value clients alive while I relocate to somewhere without extradition treaties. And if I refuse, then I detonate the explosive device I placed in the hospital pharmacy 30 minutes ago. It's small but positioned to rupture the oxygen supply lines. The fire will spread through ventilation systems faster than evacuation procedures can handle. Hundreds of casualties. All because you chose principle over pragmatism. Emily's blood went cold. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Foster pulled out his phone and showed her a live video feed. The hospital pharmacy, a device visible on a shelf among medication bottles, a timer counting down from 15 minutes. "I learned from professionals. Unlike Wade, I planned for contingencies." Emily's training ran rapid calculations. 15 minutes to evacuate a hospital was impossible. Emergency protocols required 20 minimum for orderly evacuation. Panic would make it worse. And Foster had positioned the device to maximize damage. Oxygen systems meant accelerated fire spread. Pharmacy meant toxic smoke from burning medications. "What do you want?" Emily asked. "I want you to walk to that sedan, get in the passenger seat, and accept that your hero complex just became a liability you can't afford." Foster's expression hardened. "Or I trigger the device right now and we both watch people burn while you stand here pretending you had choices." Through her bone conduction device, still active from the previous day's operation, Emily heard Brennan's voice. "Tactical teams are moving. Keep him talking. We need 2 minutes." Emily needed to buy time. Where would we even go? I have safe houses in 3 countries and contacts who specialize in making people disappear. We'd be untraceable within 48 hours. Foster moved toward the sedan, and you'd be alive instead of buried under federal investigation or blown apart trying to be noble. Seems like an easy choice. Except you'd never let me actually walk away. I'd be leverage until I wasn't useful, then I'd be a loose end. Emily stayed where she was. "I've seen how you operate, Ryan. I know what happens to people who stop being valuable to you." "Then you understand this is your best option among terrible alternatives." Foster opened the sedan's passenger door. "Get in, now." Emily glanced at the phone showing the pharmacy feed. 12 minutes remaining. Somewhere in the hospital, patients were receiving treatment. Families were visiting loved ones. Staff were working through cases that mattered. All of them in danger because Ryan Foster had decided money mattered more than lives. "No?" Emily said. Foster's expression shifted to something colder. "Then you just killed everyone in that building." His thumb moved toward the detonator on his phone. Emily reacted with the muscle memory of someone who disarmed explosives in combat zones, closing distance in 3 fast steps, striking Foster's wrist to disrupt his grip, twisting the phone away before he could trigger anything. They grappled hard against the sedan, Foster's military training matching hers, but surprise giving Emily the edge. She drove her knee into his ribs and felt something crack. Foster gasped and swung an elbow that caught her temple. Stars exploded across her vision. They both went down on concrete, fighting for control of the phone that held hundreds of lives in its digital trigger. Emily got her hand on the device first. Foster grabbed her throat and squeezed, cutting off air with professional precision. Black spots gathered at the edge of her vision. She had maybe 10 seconds before unconsciousness. She drove her thumb into Foster's eye. Not clean, not tactical, just desperate survival combat. Foster screamed and his grip loosened. Emily sucked air and rolled away, coming to her feet with the phone in her hand. Foster was already reaching for the gun in his jacket when tactical teams breached into the parking garage from 3 directions. Brennan's voice cut through the chaos. "Drop the weapon. Hands where we can see them." Foster froze with his hand on the pistol grip. For a moment, Emily thought he might try anyway, force the situation into a shooting that would end with him dead instead of arrested. Then his shoulders sagged and his hands came up empty. Tactical operators swarmed him with practiced efficiency. Handcuffs, weapons secured, rights read. Foster was pulled to his feet with all the arrogance stripped away, leaving just a man who'd made terrible choices and run out of options. Brennan approached Emily. "You okay?" "There's a bomb in the hospital pharmacy." Emily held up Foster's phone, showing the feed. 9 minutes remaining. Brennan grabbed his radio. "All units, we have an explosive device in the main hospital pharmacy. Bomb squad, immediate response. Begin controlled evacuation of surrounding areas." The next 8 minutes stretched into controlled chaos. Bomb squad specialists in heavy armor entered the pharmacy while Emily directed evacuation of patients from nearby rooms. Sarah helped move people with calm efficiency, despite fear written across her face. Jeremy coordinated with security to clear hallways. Staff worked with the kind of focused intensity that came from training and necessity. The bomb squad found the device exactly where Foster's video showed. A compact charge wired to oxygen supply lines with enough explosive to rupture pipes and ignite. They disabled it with 4 minutes remaining on the timer, methodically cutting wires and separating components until the threat was neutralized. Emily stood in the hallway outside the pharmacy watching specialists carry out the disarmed device in a containment vessel. Her hands were shaking now that adrenaline had nowhere to go. Sarah appeared beside her with a bottle of water. "Drink this," Sarah said. "You look like you're about to collapse." Emily took the water and drank half the bottle. "Thanks. Was that really a bomb?" "Yeah." "And you stopped the person who planted it?" "With help from federal agents who had much better tactical gear than I did." Emily's voice came out rougher than intended. "I just bought them time." Sarah looked at her with an expression that mixed awe and concern. "You keep saying you're just a nurse, but everything I've seen in the past 2 days tells me that's maybe 5% of who you actually are." Emily didn't have an answer that would satisfy curiosity without opening doors to classified history she couldn't fully share, so she just nodded and let the silence carry weight her words couldn't. Detective Briggs found her 20 minutes later. "Ryan Foster is in federal custody. He's already trying to negotiate a deal, offering to identify every client he sold information to in exchange for reduced sentencing. Will it work? Probably. The intelligence value of his client list outweighs the satisfaction of maximum punishment." Briggs's expression showed the particular frustration of someone who understood pragmatic justice versus satisfying justice. But he'll still spend significant time in a federal facility, and his reputation is destroyed. That counts for something. What about the Cordova network? 53 arrests executed this morning, including the people who ordered the hospital attack and everyone above them in the organization. Marco Vega's testimony combined with the evidence we gathered is enough to dismantle their entire operation. Briggs allowed himself a small smile. They're done. Completely. Emily felt something loosen in her chest. Not relief exactly, but the particular exhaustion that came after sustained crisis finally ended. And Dr. Webb? He's cooperating fully. Prosecutors are offering a deal: 3 years probation, community service, mandatory counseling, but no prison time given the coercion element. His daughter is safe in witness protection. He'll never practice medicine again, but he'll be alive and his family will be protected. Briggs paused. It's not perfect justice, but it's the justice we could actually achieve. The distinction mattered. Emily had learned in war zones that perfect outcomes were fantasies sold to civilians. Real resolution meant accepting imperfect victories and finding meaning in outcomes that were better than the alternative, even if they weren't ideal. Okay, she said. Briggs studied her. You know you're going to be asked to testify when these cases go to trial. Wade, Foster, potentially others. Your involvement will become public record. I know. And your classified service history will probably get examined by defense attorneys looking for anything to impeach your credibility. I know that too. Emily met his eyes. But the alternative was letting people get away with murder, trafficking, and betrayal. So I'll deal with whatever scrutiny comes. Briggs nodded slowly. For what it's worth, you did the right thing, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. He left her standing in the hallway where hospital operations were returning to normal rhythm, patients being treated, families reuniting, staff managing the controlled chaos that defined emergency medicine. The bomb threat had disrupted the routine but hadn't broken it. Emily returned to work because sitting still meant thinking about everything that had happened, and she wasn't ready for that processing yet. She placed IVs, updated charts, monitored vitals, and made sure people received the care they needed. The familiar motion soothed something raw inside her. Around 7 p.m., Sarah found her in the supply room doing inventory that didn't need doing. Your shift ended 2 hours ago. I know. You should go home, sleep, process. Sarah moved closer. Emily, you just stopped a bombing and helped arrest major criminals. You're allowed to be affected by that. If I stop moving, I'll fall apart. Emily's voice cracked slightly. And I can't afford to fall apart right now. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then she pulled up a chair and sat down. Okay, then I'll sit here while you do unnecessary inventory, and when you're ready to fall apart, you won't be alone. The simple offer broke something in Emily's carefully maintained composure. Tears came suddenly, not dramatic sobbing, just silent witness to accumulated stress and fear and exhaustion. Sarah didn't try to fix it or offer platitudes. She just sat there providing presence while Emily cried for the first time since she'd left military service 7 years ago. When the tears stopped, Emily wiped her face and took a shaky breath. Thanks. That's what friends do. Sarah stood. Come on, I'm driving you home. You're in no shape to operate a vehicle. Emily didn't argue. They collected her things from the locker room and walked to the parking lot where Sarah's car waited. The drive to Emily's apartment happened in comfortable silence, the kind that didn't need filling with conversation. Sarah insisted on coming upstairs to make sure the apartment was secure. Federal teams had removed the surveillance devices, but the violation of privacy still lingered. Emily locked the door behind them and stood in the middle of her living room, feeling displaced in her own space. I'll stay if you want, Sarah offered. Crash on your couch. Make sure you actually sleep instead of staying up all night running threat assessments. You don't have to do that. I know, but I'm offering anyway. Sarah's expression was firm. You spent 11 months being alone in a place that treated you like you were invisible. Maybe it's time you stopped being alone. Emily looked at the younger nurse who'd shown her kindness when no one else had, who'd stood by her when things got dangerous, who'd offered friendship without demanding explanations for classified history. Okay, Emily said. Thank you. Sarah stayed. They ordered food from a place that delivered terrible Chinese but did it fast. They ate mostly in silence while local news covered the hospital bomb threat and arrests of federal personnel on charges of espionage and conspiracy. Emily's name wasn't mentioned. Investigators had kept her role carefully vague in official statements. Around midnight, Sarah fell asleep on the couch with a blanket Emily provided. Emily sat in her bedroom with the lights off, watching shadows and thinking about everything that had led to this moment. She'd left military service broken and exhausted, convinced that building a quiet civilian life meant hiding everything she'd been. 11 months of being dismissed and underestimated had reinforced that choice, but the past 2 days had proven something different, that strength didn't come from hiding who you were. It came from choosing when and how to reveal it. Dr. Marcus Webb had underestimated her and paid for that arrogance with his career. Jennifer Wade had threatened her and ended up in federal custody. Ryan Foster had tried to coerce her and faced charges that would destroy everything he'd built through betrayal. And Emily had survived all of it, not by being invisible, but by being exactly who she'd always been, someone who protected people, who fought for what mattered, who refused to let fear or intimidation define her choices. Morning came with pale light through bedroom windows. Emily showered and dressed while Sarah made coffee with the kind of comfort in someone else's kitchen that spoke to genuine friendship. They sat at the small table and drank from mismatched mugs. "What happens now?" Sarah asked. "I go back to work, testify when trials happen, figure out what kind of life I want to build now that hiding isn't necessary anymore." Emily took a sip of coffee. "And I stop letting other people define my worth." "That sounds healthy." "That sounds terrifying, but necessary." Emily set down her mug. "Thank you for staying, for everything." "You don't have to keep thanking me. We're friends. That's what this is." Sarah's smile was genuine. "Besides, I have a feeling your life is going to stay interesting. Someone needs to make sure you don't face all of it alone." They finished coffee and drove to the hospital together. The staff entrance led to locker rooms where the day shift was arriving and night shift was departing. Emily changed into fresh scrubs and prepared for whatever the day would bring. She was walking toward the ER when hospital administration's assistant intercepted her. "Emily Dawson, the board of directors would like to see you. Conference room B, now, if possible." Emily's stomach tightened. Board meetings meant official proceedings, disciplinary actions, policy discussions, decisions that affected careers. She followed the assistant to the administrative wing where polished floors and expensive art marked territory that belonged to executives rather than medical staff. Conference room B held 6 people around a long table. The hospital CEO, the chief of staff, 3 board members, and Colonel David Brennan in his dress uniform, which immediately told Emily this meeting was more complicated than simple hospital business. "Ms. Dawson, please sit," the CEO said, gesturing to an empty chair. Emily sat and waited. Years of military briefings had taught her to let authority figures speak first and reveal their agenda before committing to responses. The CEO folded his hands on the table. "We've been briefed by federal investigators about your role in preventing the hospital attack, identifying internal security breaches, and stopping a bombing that could have killed dozens of patients and staff. Your actions were extraordinary." Emily said nothing. Dr. Webb's betrayal was a failure of our oversight and screening processes. His resignation has been accepted, and we're implementing new protocols to prevent similar situations. The CEO paused. "But what's become clear through this crisis is that Riverside General needs someone with tactical experience and crisis management training to develop comprehensive security procedures, someone who understands both medical operations and threat assessment." One of the board members leaned forward. "We'd like to offer you the position of Director of Emergency Medical Security. It would include developing protocols, training staff, coordinating with law enforcement, and serving as liaison for high-risk patient situations. Significant salary increase, administrative authority, and recognition for the expertise you've demonstrated." Emily processed the offer, a leadership position that would use her military background instead of hiding it, authority to implement changes that could prevent future crises, acknowledgement that her skills had value beyond basic nursing. It was everything she'd quietly wished for during 11 months of being dismissed. "What happened to Dr. Webb's position?" Emily asked. "We're conducting a national search for a new chief of emergency medicine, someone with both clinical excellence and leadership integrity." The CEO's expression was careful. "Your input on that selection process would be valued given your experience with the department." Emily looked at Colonel Brennan. "Why are you here?" "Because federal authorities want to ensure proper security protocols are implemented at facilities handling protected witnesses or high-value patients. The military is prepared to provide consulting resources if Riverside General agrees to serve as a model program for other civilian hospitals." Brennan's expression was neutral. "And because I wanted to make sure you understood this offer is genuine recognition of your capabilities, not compensation for cooperation with investigations." The distinction mattered. Emily had been used as an asset by people who saw her skills as tools rather than seeing her as a person. This offer, if genuine, represented something different. "I need to think about it," Emily said. The CEO nodded. "Of course. Take 48 hours. We understand this is a significant decision." The meeting ended. Emily left the conference room and found Sarah waiting in the hallway outside. "Well?" Sarah asked. "They offered me a director position, security protocols, crisis management, tactical consulting." "That's amazing. You should accept." "Maybe." Emily started walking toward the ER. "Or maybe I should find a different hospital where I don't have 11 months of bad history with people who only respect me now because I proved I could be dangerous." Sarah grabbed her arm gently. "Or maybe you should stay and build something better. Show people that strength doesn't require being cruel. That leadership can come from someone who was underestimated and chose to rise above it instead of becoming bitter." Emily stopped walking. "You sound very sure about that." "I am sure, because I've watched you handle impossible situations with grace and competence that most people couldn't manage. And I think this hospital needs someone like you in leadership." Sarah's expression was fierce. "Don't run because it's easier. Stay because it matters." The words hit deeper than tactical considerations or career calculations. Emily had spent 7 years running from her past, building walls between who she'd been and who she wanted to become. Maybe Sarah was right. Maybe staying and building something meaningful mattered more than escaping to somewhere new where no one knew her history. "I'll think about it," Emily said. They returned to the ER where morning shift was handling its usual volume. Emily worked through cases with Sarah's words echoing in her mind. By noon, she'd made her decision. She found the CEO's office and knocked once. "I'll accept the position, but I have conditions." The CEO looked up from his computer. "What conditions?" "First, complete transparency in hiring the new chief of emergency medicine. I want input, but not final decision authority. This department needs someone who leads through respect, not intimidation." "Agreed." "Second, mandatory training for all staff on recognizing coercion, threats, and inappropriate pressure from anyone, supervisors, patients, family members, whoever. People need to know they can report problems without retaliation." "We can implement that." "Third, Sarah Richmond gets promoted to senior nurse with scheduling authority and a salary increase. She earned it." Emily met his eyes. "And Jeremy Costa gets proper security training instead of being left to figure things out through trial and error." The CEO made notes. "Anything else?" "Yeah. I want my real name on the position. Emily Garrett, not Emily Dawson. My service record is going to be public during trials anyway. Might as well own it." The CEO extended his hand across the desk. "Welcome to hospital administration, Ms. Garrett. When can you start?" "Give me 2 weeks to finish transitioning my current patients and training a replacement. Then I'm yours." They shook hands. Emily left his office feeling something she hadn't experienced in years. Not happiness exactly, but purpose. Direction. The sense that maybe the path forward didn't require hiding who she'd been in order to become who she wanted to be. She found Sarah near the nurse's station and pulled her aside. "You're getting promoted? Senior nurse, better pay, scheduling authority?" Sarah's eyes widened. "What? How?" "I made it a condition of accepting the director position. You earned it," Emily smiled. "And you were right. Staying and building something better matters more than running to somewhere new." Sarah hugged her impulsively. "Thank you for everything." The next 2 weeks moved quickly. Emily trained her replacement while developing initial security protocols. She testified before a grand jury about Wade's betrayal and Foster's conspiracy, her words measured and precise. She sat through interviews with federal investigators documenting every detail of her involvement. And slowly, the staff at Riverside General began treating her differently, not with fear, but with genuine respect. Residents asked her opinion on complex cases. Attending physicians consulted her on patients with trauma backgrounds. Even the janitor, who'd barely acknowledged her for 11 months, stopped to thank her for preventing the bombing. Marcus Webb sent a letter from the minimum security facility where he was serving his probation. It was brief, apologetic, and concluded with words that surprised her. "You showed me what real strength looks like. I hope someday I can demonstrate I learned that lesson. Jennifer Wade refused all contact. Ryan Foster attempted to reach out through his attorneys, but Emily declined. Some people deserve forgiveness. Others just deserve the consequences they'd earned. On her last day as a floor nurse, Emily worked a full shift and said goodbye to patients who'd become familiar faces. The elderly man with pneumonia was finally being discharged. The construction worker with the injured hand had regained full mobility. The teenager with the dislocated shoulder came back with her parents to thank Emily personally for the care she'd received. As the shift ended, Sarah gathered the entire ER staff for an impromptu celebration. Someone had brought cake. Jeremy gave a rambling speech about courage and dedication that made people laugh and tear up simultaneously. And Emily stood surrounded by colleagues who'd ignored her for months, but now saw her clearly. Dr. Patricia Chen, a new attending who'd started during Webb's absence, approached Emily with a glass of sparkling cider. "I heard what you did, stopping the attack, preventing the bombing, taking down corrupt federal agents. That's impressive." "I just did what needed doing." Emily accepted the cider. "That's what makes it impressive. You didn't seek recognition or glory. You just protected people because they needed protecting." Patricia raised her glass. "To Emily Garrett, the nurse who proved that quiet strength changes the world more than loud arrogance ever could." Everyone raised their glasses and drank. Emily felt emotion gathering in her throat, but kept it controlled through force of will. These people didn't need to see her cry. They needed to see that vulnerability and strength could coexist in the same person. The celebration ended. Staff filtered out to continue lives that would intersect again tomorrow. Emily changed out of her scrubs for the last time as a floor nurse and stood in the locker room looking at her reflection in the mirror. 32 years old, 7 years removed from military service, 11 months into a civilian life that had finally revealed itself as something worth building instead of hiding inside. She wasn't the same person who'd arrived at Riverside General afraid that being seen would mean being destroyed. That version had believed invisibility equaled safety. This version understood that real safety came from being strong enough to be visible and compassionate enough to use that strength wisely. Colonel Brennan was waiting in the parking lot when Emily left through the staff entrance. He stood beside a government vehicle looking every bit the career officer who'd commanded respect in war zones and administrative offices. "Thought you'd left town," Emily said. "Had to file reports in D.C., just got back." Brennan gestured to the hospital behind them. "Heard you accepted the director position. Good choice." "We'll see. I've never been in hospital administration before." "You've commanded medical operations in combat zones. This will be easier." Brennan's expression softened slightly. "I'm proud of you, Emily. You could have run when this got dangerous. Instead, you stood and fought for people who'd never shown you basic respect. That's character. Or stubbornness. Sometimes those are the same thing." Brennan pulled an envelope from his jacket. "This is an official letter from the Department of Defense. Your service record is being updated to reflect commendations that were previously classified. And you're being offered a reserve position as a tactical medical consultant. No active duty requirements, but if situations arise where your expertise could save lives, they'd like the option to request your assistance." Emily took the envelope. "What kind of situations?" "The kind where hostages need medical attention, where protected witnesses face threats, where civilian hospitals become battlegrounds. The kind you've already proven you can handle." Brennan met her eyes. "It's completely optional, but the offer stands if you want it." Emily opened the envelope and read the official letter with its bureaucratic language and formal recognition. Part of her wanted to refuse, to maintain the separation between military service and civilian life she'd worked so hard to establish. But another part recognized that denying her capabilities didn't make them disappear. It just made them unavailable when they could matter most. "I'll think about it," she said. "That's all anyone can ask." Brennan extended his hand. "You did exceptional work, Sergeant Garrett. Don't forget that when things get complicated again." They shook hands. Brennan got in his vehicle and drove away, leaving Emily alone in the parking lot as evening shadows stretched across pavement. She drove home to her apartment where Sarah had helped her remove the last traces of surveillance equipment and reclaim the space as truly hers. The walls were bare, but she'd started acquiring small things that made it feel less temporary. A plant from the hospital gift shop, a framed photograph of mountains she hoped to visit someday, books she'd been meaning to read for years. Emily made dinner and ate while watching the sunset through her window. Local news mentioned the ongoing trials of Jennifer Wade and Ryan Foster, their faces shown alongside reports of conspiracy and betrayal. Marco Vega had been relocated to an undisclosed location where he'd continue cooperating with prosecutors. The Cordova network was being systematically dismantled with dozens of arrests across 3 states. Justice was happening, slow and imperfect, but happening. Her phone rang. Unknown number. Emily answered cautiously. Ms. Garrett? This is Assistant Director Williams from the FBI. I wanted to personally thank you for your cooperation in the investigation of Captain Foster and related criminal networks. Your testimony was instrumental in securing convictions. Just doing what was right. Many people know what's right. Fewer have the courage to act on it when doing so is dangerous. Williams paused. I also wanted to inform you that based on your assistance, the Bureau would like to extend an offer for consulting work on cases involving medical facilities, protected witnesses, or situations requiring tactical medical expertise. Compensation would be competitive, and assignment would be entirely voluntary. Another offer to use her skills. Another opportunity to be seen and valued for capabilities she'd spent years hiding. Send me the details, Emily said. I'll review them. Excellent. And Ms. Garrett, you should be proud of what you've accomplished. Not everyone could have done what you did. The call ended. Emily set down her phone and looked around her apartment at the life she'd built from pieces of who she'd been and who she was becoming. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't finished. But it was hers. 2 days later, Emily Garrett started her new position as Director of Emergency Medical Security at Riverside General Hospital. She arrived early, dressed professionally, and walked through the entrance with her head high and her real name on her identification badge. The first week was intense. Meetings with department heads, reviews of existing protocols, interviews with staff about security concerns they'd never felt comfortable raising before. Emily listened more than she spoke, absorbing information and building understanding of systems that needed changing. She also made time to visit patients. The work of leadership mattered, but so did remembering why that work existed, to protect people who needed care during their most vulnerable moments. On Friday afternoon, Emily presented her initial security assessment to the hospital board. She outlined gaps in current procedures, recommended training programs, and proposed coordination protocols with law enforcement that would prevent future breaches without disrupting medical operations. The CEO looked impressed. This is comprehensive work for 1 week. I had good training in assessing operational vulnerabilities. Emily clicked to her next slide. But more importantly, I spent 11 months watching this hospital operate. I saw what worked and what didn't. That experience informs these recommendations. The board approved her proposals unanimously. As the meeting ended, Dr. Patricia Chen approached Emily in the hallway. I'm heading the search committee for the new chief of emergency medicine. Would you be willing to interview candidates with me? Your perspective would be valuable. Absolutely. Emily fell into step beside her. I want to make sure we hire someone who leads through competence instead of intimidation. Agreed. We need someone who recognizes that diverse backgrounds and experiences make departments stronger, not weaker. Patricia smiled. Someone like you. They reviewed candidate files in Patricia's office, discussing qualifications and leadership philosophy. It was collaborative work, 2 professionals with different expertise finding common ground in shared values. Around 6 p.m., Emily returned to her new office on the administrative floor. It was small, but had a window overlooking the parking lot where ambulances delivered emergencies and families came seeking hope. She stood watching that intersection of crisis and care, thinking about all the paths that had led her here. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Dinner tomorrow? My place? I'm cooking, and I promise it'll be better than hospital cafeteria food. Emily smiled and typed back. I'll bring wine. She locked her office and left through the main entrance where Jeremy Costa was working security desk duty. He straightened when he saw her. Ms. Garrett, have a good evening. You too, Jeremy. How's the new training program going? It's good. Really good, actually. I'm learning things I should have known from the start. He looked embarrassed. I wanted to thank you for advocating for that. I know I froze during the attack, and you didn't freeze when it mattered, Emily interrupted gently. You helped coordinate evacuation during the bomb threat. You protected people when they needed it. That's what counts. Jeremy nodded, looking relieved. Still, thank you. Emily left the hospital and drove home through Marshall Point streets that were becoming familiar instead of temporary. She'd lived here 11 months, but only recently started actually seeing the city, the parks where families gathered, the restaurants where communities formed, the small details that made a place feel like more than just geography. At her apartment, she changed into comfortable clothes and sat on her small balcony watching the sunset. The letter from the Department of Defense sat on her coffee table alongside the FBI's consulting offer. Both represented futures where her past served purposes larger than herself. She'd spent 7 years believing that hiding her capabilities meant finding peace. But the past 2 weeks had proven something different. That peace didn't come from being invisible. It came from being visible in ways that aligned with your values. From using strength to protect instead of dominate. From leading through competence and compassion instead of fear and intimidation. Marcus Webb had dismissed her because he'd mistaken quietness for weakness. Jennifer Wade had threatened her because she'd underestimated someone who'd survived worse threats in worse places. Ryan Foster had tried to coerce her because he'd assumed everyone operated from the same corrupt pragmatism that defined his choices. All of them had learned the cost of those miscalculations. Emily Garrett wasn't the same person who'd left military service broken and searching for escape. She wasn't even the same person who'd arrived at Riverside General hoping to hide in plain sight. She was someone who'd discovered that the strongest version of herself emerged not from denying the past, but from integrating it with purpose and intention. Her phone rang again. This time she recognized the number. Detective Briggs. Emily, sorry to call after hours, but I wanted to let you know the jury came back on Jennifer Wade. Guilty on all counts. She's facing 25 to 30 years federal time. And Foster? He took a plea deal. 15 years in exchange for testimony against his client network. Not as satisfying as a trial, but it gets dangerous people off the streets. Briggs paused. None of this happens without you. You know that, right? A lot of people did important work. True, but you were the catalyst. The person who refused to accept injustice even when accepting it would have been easier and safer. Briggs's voice carried genuine respect. That matters. It changes things. Not just this case, but everything that comes after. They talked for a few more minutes about trial schedules and testimony requirements, then ended the call. Emily sat in the gathering darkness, thinking about change and consequence, and the ways individual choices rippled outward into outcomes that affected people you'd never meet. She'd made a choice to fight instead of flee, to stand instead of hide, to protect instead of pretend. And in making that choice, she'd discovered something crucial, that being underestimated wasn't a weakness to overcome. It was an advantage to leverage. Because people who assumed you were soft or weak or incompetent never saw the moment when you proved otherwise until it was too late to adjust their strategy. Marcus Webb had spent 11 months systematically underestimating her, and that arrogance had blinded him to the person she actually was until circumstances forced recognition. Jennifer Wade had made the same mistake with higher stakes. Ryan Foster had tried to exploit what he thought was vulnerability and found strength instead. All of them had learned too late that dismissing someone because they were quiet or kind or unassuming was the fastest way to lose to them when situations turned serious. Emily stood and went back inside her apartment. She pulled out her laptop and began drafting the first of many security protocols she'd implement at Riverside General. Procedures designed to protect staff from harassment, patients from threats, and everyone from people who thought power came from intimidation instead of competence. It was detailed work, important work, work that would make a difference for people she'd never personally meet, but whose lives would be safer because she'd chosen to stay and build instead of run and hide. Around midnight, she saved her progress and prepared for sleep. Tomorrow, she'd continue the work. The day after that, more of the same. Building systems, training people, creating structures that protected the vulnerable and held the powerful accountable. It wasn't the life she'd imagined when she'd left military service searching for peace. It was better. Because peace wasn't the absence of conflict. It was the presence of purpose aligned with values worth defending. Emily Garrett closed her eyes and slept without nightmares for the first time in 7 years, knowing that tomorrow would bring challenges, but also knowing she had the strength, the support, and the purpose to meet them. She'd been dismissed as soft, underestimated as weak, assumed to be someone who'd never fight back. And in proving all those assumptions wrong, she'd discovered the truth that would define everything that came after. The people who dismiss you are giving you the greatest tactical advantage you could ask for. Never waste it, never apologize for it, and when the moment comes to prove them wrong, do it with such absolute competence that no one ever makes that mistake about you again. The quiet strength that changes the world doesn't announce itself with noise. It just shows up when needed and does what's necessary. And Emily Garrett had finally learned to be okay with that.